Hey guys, tonight we begin with the floating palace that promised perfection, glamour, and enough polished silver to blind an entire ballroom. The first-class world aboard Titanic. You step into a corridor that smells faintly of fresh varnish and imported perfume. Every surface gleams. Every footstep is softened by carpets thick enough to make you question whether gravity works the same way up here. And everyone around you seems to glide, not walk, as if wealth itself has a preferred gait. In a few hours the band will play, the champagne will fizz, and the ship will hum like a continent that thinks it cannot sink. So before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You step aboard with the same careful confidence everyone else seems to be wearing, as if the ship itself might judge your posture. The air around you smells faintly of polished brass and expensive excitement. The gangway trembles beneath your feet, just enough to remind you that this floating palace has not yet decided if you are worthy. A steward nods with a practiced smile that says he has already escorted 6 families richer than you and has 4 more queued behind. Still, he gestures as though unveiling a secret kingdom. Maybe he enjoys the performance, or maybe the tips are that good. Inside, the first thing you notice is the warmth. Not emotional warmth, no. Titanic radiates the confident glow of a machine that knows exactly how much coal it is burning to impress you. Electric lights shine from every angle, throwing soft gold across the walls. You feel as though you have stepped into the sun. Except here the sun comes with velvet carpets and an orchestra that seems to be rehearsing ambition one note at a time. Passengers glide around you with the ease of people who have never sprinted for a public carriage or eaten a meal that came wrapped in paper. Their luggage glides too, carried by cabin stewards who move with that brisk efficiency that only happens when someone else is paying for your exhaustion. You catch snippets of conversation as you walk. Sentences decorated with words like delightful and marvelous, the kinds of words rarely used by anyone who has ever balanced a budget. You turn down a corridor lined with wood so polished you can see yourself reflected in it, though the reflection does not look quite like you. It looks like a version of you who already belongs here. The walls are trimmed with carvings that serve no purpose except to whisper that someone was paid handsomely to carve things that did not need to exist. A gentle vibration hums through the soles of your shoes. Not enough to unsteady you, just enough to say the engines are waking up. The entire ship feels alive, as though it has lungs, and is inhaling everyone's expectations. A steward guides you toward your cabin, and his voice is quiet. The kind of soft authority that lets you know he could recite the name of every first-class passenger without taking a breath. He opens the door to your room with a flourish that borders on dramatic. Inside, the mattress looks thick enough to qualify as its own geographical feature. The linens are crisp, the air lightly scented with something floral that probably has a French name you will mispronounce if you try it aloud. A bowl of fruit sits on the table. None of the fruit is bruised, which is unsettling in its own way. You touch the edge of the dresser and feel the smooth grain of the wood beneath your fingers. Everything here invites touch, admiration, display. You can almost hear the ship whispering, "See, nothing bad has ever happened in a room this handsome." A dangerous promise, but you let it comfort you anyway. Outside your window, the harbor shimmers with movement, tugboats and gulls, and passengers still boarding. You watch until the commotion becomes background noise, something distant and harmless, like the idea of work on a day you happen to be on vacation. You decide to explore, because staying still in a place like this feels almost disrespectful. The moment you step back into the corridor, the ship greets you with the faint smell of fresh paint. Titanic is brand new, a debutante dressed in steel and swagger. As you walk, you pass more first-class passengers, the kind who hold themselves as though they invented chairs. Their clothes are crisp, their posture straight, their expressions politely detached. They nod politely, the kind of nod that acknowledges your existence without fully committing to knowing your name. Soon you reach a staircase, the smaller cousin of the grand one you have heard whispered about in newspapers. Even this lesser staircase is beautiful, its balustrade carved with loving excess. As you descend, you hear faint music drifting from somewhere below, the early evening tune of musicians warming up. The notes echo softly, floating up the stairwell like a greeting from the night ahead. You pause on the landing and take it in, the quiet luxury, the gentle hush, the feeling that you have stepped into a story told in warm light and polished mahogany. This is the world of first class, a world that promises perfection because perfection is profitable. And for the first time, you feel the ship's silent invitation settle around you, an unspoken message shared by everyone who walks these halls with steady steps and confident smiles. You belong here now. You follow the current of well-dressed passengers toward the heart of first class, carried along by the soft chatter of people who all seem convinced this ship was designed specifically for them. The corridor widens, the light warms, and then you see it, the grand staircase, rising beneath a glass dome that pours sunlight down like a spotlight searching for a lead actor. You pause for a moment, not because you mean to, but because something in your brain decides you should admire it before attempting to walk down it without tripping. Every inch gleams with polished oak, carved scrollwork, and ironwork so delicate it looks as though it might sigh if you breathe on it. The whole structure seems suspiciously aware of how beautiful it is. You take the first step down, and it feels different from any staircase you have ever met. It is wide enough for several people to descend at once, yet everyone instinctively drifts into a graceful pattern, as if they have rehearsed for weeks. A woman in a hat large enough to qualify as partial cloud cover glides past you with a smile that is both polite and triumphant. You begin to understand that nobody is simply walking here. Everyone is performing wealth, stability, and the kind of refinement that usually comes with piano lessons and generational estates. Even the sound of footsteps is curated. Instead of clattering, they land with gentle taps, softened by thick carpet runners that appear to be woven directly out of privilege. The banister feels smooth beneath your hand, warm from the touch of dozens of passengers who have already admired it. As you descend, you catch sight of the wrought iron panels with swirling patterns that look like they belong inside a jewelry box. At the landing stands the large carved clock, the famous one you have seen sketched in newspapers. Its cherubs peer down at you with wooden indifference, as though judging whether you deserve to walk beneath them. You cannot tell if they approve, but you suspect they do not disapprove either, and that feels like victory. Around you, the staircase becomes a social arena, disguised as architecture. Passengers linger not because they are tired, but because this is where people pause to be noticed. Conversations float through the air like perfume. A gentleman discusses investments with an accent you cannot quite place. A woman laughs at something her companion says, the laugh light and practiced, the kind that suggests her family has never encountered a problem that could not be solved with a solicitor and a donation. You witness greetings that look like miniature diplomatic meetings. Delicate bows and measured compliments exchanged as though they are pieces of fine china. You continue downward and realize how strategic everything is. The staircase splits into two sweeping arms that curve in opposite directions, allowing passengers to meet, observe, and glide apart with theatrical efficiency. From here, you can see the entrance to the dining saloon, the reception rooms, and the lounge. All the doorways are aligned so that moving between them feels like transitioning between scenes. The ship might as well be telling you, now step into the next part of the show. As you reach the lower landing, sunlight catches the edge of the glass dome above, and for a moment it feels like the entire staircase is glowing. People gather on the landing to chat, admire the decor, or quietly calculate who outranks whom in the subtle hierarchy that flows like an invisible river through first class. A steward passes by, his posture impossibly straight, balancing a tray as though it is a sacred object. He navigates the crowd without touching a single soul, which is impressive given how tightly some couples cluster to display jewelry, status, or possibly boredom. You pause again near the cherub-topped clock. The room hums with a kind of elegant anticipation, as if something grand is always about to happen. You begin to understand why this staircase feels like a stage. It is not just the architecture, though the ship has arranged every curve and column with theatrical precision. It is the people, the way they inhabit the space as though royalty might walk in at any moment, or better yet, as though they are royalty. You realize that descending this staircase is not merely walking, it is an entrance, a statement, an audition for the role of someone who belongs in the most luxurious ship in the world. And as you take the final steps, you feel it too. That subtle lift in your posture, that small spark of pride. The ship has already begun to work its magic. You leave the staircase behind and step into a corridor so polished it could double as a mirror. The walls are paneled in warm oak, each board glowing under soft electric light, and the air carries a faint mix of varnish, fresh paint, and something else you cannot quite name. It might be perfume. It might be money. Hard to tell the difference in a place like this. The carpet beneath your shoes is thick enough to make you wonder if it was designed to silence footsteps or simply to remind you that comfort can be engineered if you throw enough funding at it. Every sound is softened, muted, controlled, as though the ship has installed acoustics specifically to prevent any first-class passenger from hearing anything unpleasant. Even your own breathing feels more refined somehow. You walk slowly, partly because there is so much to take in, and partly because everyone else moves with the deliberate pace of people who have never run for anything in their lives. Their footsteps float rather than land. You pass an older gentleman whose beard looks like it should have its own title, Lord something of somewhere. He nods politely, though you suspect he has already forgotten your existence. A pair of young women stroll a few steps behind, whispering with the kind of excitement that only comes from being somewhere their friends back home will never fully believe. Their gloves are pristine. Their posture is perfect. Their whispers are about hats, but based on their tone, you would think they were discussing state secrets. At each corner, a steward stands at attention, ready to assist with anything from directions to existential crises. His uniform is crisp, the collar so stiff it seems capable of slicing paper. When you approach, he offers a quiet smile that suggests he is trained to handle every situation from spilled tea to minor diplomatic chaos. You thank him and continue on, and as you walk, you notice how the corridor bends with gentle curves instead of sharp angles. Titanic does not believe in abruptness. Everything flows, everything eases, everything glides. You pass open doorways that reveal lounges, writing rooms, and small pockets of conversation. In one, a cluster of passengers discusses politics with the confidence of people who have never lost an argument in their lives. In another, a woman sits beside a window with a book delicately propped open. Her posture so perfect you suspect the chair came with instructions. Her expression is serene, but you can tell she is reading more to be seen reading than for the content itself. You keep moving, partly to explore and partly because standing still feels conspicuous. The corridor stretches on, lined with sconces that cast golden pools of light on the walls. The smell of varnish deepens as you reach a section that seems even newer, as though someone was still applying finishing touches minutes before you arrived. You trail your fingers lightly along the paneling. The surface is smooth, warm, and almost hypnotic. It is not just wood, it is the idea of wood, refined to perfection. You try to imagine the labor behind it, the hands that sanded each piece, the crews that worked long hours below decks to prepare these hallways for passengers who might never spare a thought for the effort. The ship does not reveal that story. It only reveals the result. A faint vibration hums through your shoes, subtle and steady. The engines are fully awake now, and the ship pulses with confidence. You hear a distant trill from a violin, possibly coming from the lounge where musicians are warming up. The The notes drift into the corridor and mingle with the soft light until you can almost see the music moving along the walls. It makes the entire passage feel alive, as though Titanic itself is humming a tune composed entirely of elegance and ambition. You step aside as a steward pushes a luggage cart past you, stacked with trunks that look heavy enough to crush a lesser ship. He handles them effortlessly, bowing slightly as he passes. The corridor shifts again, leading you toward a section where the decor grows even more elaborate. Painted panels appear between the woodwork, each scene depicting landscapes and gardens you have never visited, but now feel as though you should. At the next junction, you reach a larger hallway branching toward the suites. The air grows stiller, richer, more curated. These are the quarters of passengers whose names can open doors across continents. You linger a moment at the intersection, listening to soft voices drifting from behind closed doors, the subtle clink of glassware, the rustle of fine fabrics. Everything here feels intentional, as though the corridor is a script and each person is performing their assigned role. You take another step and let the ship carry you forward, deeper into its maze of quiet luxury. The walls seem to follow you with their soft glow, and the air hums with a confidence that borders on arrogance. You continue walking, and slowly it dawns on you. These corridors are not designed simply to take you somewhere. They are designed to make you feel something. You move through them, and suddenly you are no longer just a passenger. You are part of the spectacle. You notice it the moment you step into one of the larger reception rooms. The shift in air, the subtle tightening of posture, the way conversation dips and then swells again as though the room itself is adjusting its collar. First-class fashion is not simply clothing. It is an ecosystem, a shimmering display of silk, feathers, and stubborn social power. You feel it before you fully understand it, the way everyone's eyes glide across one another, quietly measuring hems, jewels, and confidence. You stand near the doorway for a moment, pretending to admire a floral arrangement large enough to qualify as a small shrub. But in truth, you are observing the battlefield. Women move through the room with effortless precision, gowns trailing behind them like trained attendants. Their fabrics shimmer in the lamplight, every thread a small announcement of who they are, where they come from, and exactly how many people stitch the garment while trying not to stab themselves from exhaustion. The colors are rich, the cuts deliberate, the embroidery intricate enough to make you question the sanity of whoever sewed it. A woman in a deep sapphire dress passes by, and you swear she is floating. Her hair is arranged in soft waves that look simple, until you remember how long it takes a mere mortal to pin hair into obedience. A diamond pinned at her shoulder catches the light and throws it back into the room like a smug wink. Behind her glides a rival in emerald satin, her neckline edged in tiny pearls that glimmer with each breath. You realize the two are engaged in a duel, except instead of swords they use fabrics, jewels, and posture. The stakes are higher than you expect. Reputation is a fragile object in first class, easily shattered if the wrong person decides your sleeves are out of fashion. The men, for their part, pretend they are above such competitions. They stand in stiff collars and tailored jackets, their outfits nearly identical to the untrained eye. But you begin to see the differences, subtle and intentional. One man's waistcoat is stitched with a faint floral pattern. Another's cufflinks gleam with a level of shine that suggests they have been polished by someone who earns their keep removing fingerprints. A third adjusts his cravat in a way that tells you he knows exactly how many people are watching. Their competition is quiet, but no less fierce. It lives in the way they straighten their backs and angle their chins, as if trying to convince the air that they are the most successful man within a 10-foot radius. You move farther into the room and notice that the stewards have perfected the art of invisibility, gliding between guests with trays of drinks while pretending not to witness the fashion parade unfolding before them. They offer champagne with polite smiles that never reveal their true thoughts, though you suspect they have mentally ranked every outfit in the room and have strong opinions about hats. Speaking of hats, one passes you now. At least you think there is a person beneath it. The hat is enormous, blooming with feathers and silk flowers, a portable garden that threatens to brush the chandelier if she tilts her head too boldly. She stops to greet a friend wearing a more modest creation, and you watch as their eyes flick, just once, to each other's headpieces. The exchange lasts half a second, but carries the emotional weight of an opera. Compliments follow, sweet and practiced, but their smiles are tight around the edges. You begin to understand that fashion here is a language, one spoken in hems and fabrics, in the way a sleeve drapes or a collar sits. It tells stories, reveals alliances, and occasionally sparks small diplomatic crises disguised as compliments. Even you feel its pull. You glance down at your own attire and wonder if it blends in or stands out in a way that suggests you are trying too hard. Titanic is a ship built on spectacle, and the passengers have absorbed the message. They dress for the dining saloon the way some people dress for their future biographies. A steward approaches with a tray of champagne, and when you take a glass, you catch your reflection in the polished metal. For a moment you see yourself through first-class eyes. The lights soften your features. The room casts its glow around you. You look almost like you belong, or at least like someone who is learning how to. You sip the champagne and continue watching the swirl of fabrics and glimmering jewels around you. It is a quiet competition, subtle but ever present, and you find yourself drawn into it whether you intend to or not. On Titanic, fashion is not decoration. It is currency, armor, and sometimes a weapon. And as you move through the room, you feel its weight and its thrill settling around you like a new, shimmering second skin. You enter the dining saloon with the cautious optimism of someone who hopes the meal will be delicious, but suspects the room may judge them before the soup arrives. The space glows under rows of chandeliers, their soft light falling over white tablecloths so crisp they could probably cut you if you folded them wrong. Everywhere you look, silver glints, glass sparkles, and porcelain waits in perfect formation, like an army trained for the sole purpose of impressing strangers. The hum of conversation settles over the room like a warm blanket stitched from accents, laughter, and the subtle clink of cutlery that has probably seen more polishing in a day than you have seen in your lifetime. A steward leads you to your table with the seriousness of a man escorting royalty to a coronation. He pulls out your chair with a practiced gesture, and as you sit, you notice how the chair feels more solid than some apartments you have known. The waiter brings the menu, and you discover it is less a list of dishes and more a declaration. Every course has a name that sounds like it survived several centuries of aristocratic approval. You scan the options and pretend you understand the difference between 3 types of consommé. Everyone around you seems to know instinctively, which suggests that either they are exceptionally worldly or exceptionally good at faking it. As you settle in, the social choreography becomes more obvious. People greet one another with soft nods, subtle smiles, and those lightly raised eyebrows that hint at alliances stronger than the ship's bulkheads. The men sit straighter, adjusting their cuffs as though each button carries a tiny piece of their pride. The women lift their chins just enough to show elegance, but not enough to appear aggressive. It is a performance, detailed and silent, and you are suddenly very aware that you have joined the cast. The first course arrives. A delicate soup, steaming gently, smelling faintly of herbs and quiet approval. You lift your spoon and feel the eyes of nearby passengers flick toward you. It is not intrusive, not hostile, but observant, as though everyone is silently checking that you understand which spoon to use. You choose the outermost one, because that is what etiquette guides preach, and the small nod from a gentleman across the table assures you that you have passed the first test. You exhale slowly and enjoy the soup, which is rich and warm and far more confident than you feel. Conversation at your table picks up as the next course arrives, each plate presented with a flourish that borders on magical. Someone to your left speaks about business in a tone that suggests the world bends slightly when he signs a contract. A woman across from you discusses her travels with effortless charm, describing cities as if she personally approved the architecture. You smile, comment when appropriate, and listen carefully. The hierarchy tightens with every exchanged sentence. Status floats in the air like perfume, subtle but unmistakable. You can almost see it, shimmering above certain heads like an invisible crown. By the third course, the room grows louder. Laughter rises from clusters of passengers who have already found their preferred conversational territories. You notice how some tables radiate energy, drawing glances from surrounding diners. Others remain quieter, more reserved, as though guarding their dignity from unnecessary display. The waiters glide between tables with silent efficiency, refilling glasses, clearing plates, and maintaining the illusion that first-class life is effortless. You realize that they know every passenger's name, preference, and mood, and they adjust themselves accordingly. Their grace is a performance of its own. The main course arrives, accompanied by a scent that could make even the most cynical person fall briefly in love with roasted meat. You take a bite and understand why passengers speak of Titanic's chefs as though they are deities in aprons. For a moment, you forget about hierarchy, etiquette, and posture. The food is that good, but then you hear a burst of laughter from a nearby table, followed by the subtle shifting of eyes towards someone whose opinion clearly holds weight. The room responds like a living organism, adjusting itself around these invisible points of power. Dessert is served, delicate and artful, the kind of dish that feels too beautiful to eat. You savor it slowly, partly out of politeness, and partly because you want to stretch the moment as long as possible. Around you, conversations soften, the energy settling into a warm, contented glow. The hierarchy still hums beneath the surface, but the sharpness has mellowed. Everyone seems more relaxed, more human, as though food has reminded them that even the wealthy require sustenance to maintain their grandeur. When you finally stand to leave, you feel the shift. The dining saloon has tested you, watched you, measured you, and somehow you have slipped into its rhythm. You step out into the corridor with a strange sense of awareness. In this world, meals are not only meals, they are ceremonies, stages, and subtle battlegrounds. And tonight, you have taken your place among them. You discover the unspoken rules almost by accident, the way someone discovers a hidden step on a staircase only after tripping over it. They do not announce themselves. They simply appear, woven into gestures, glances, and the careful orchestration of polite conversation. At first you think you understand the basics. Please and thank you. Napkin on lap. Do not stab anything with a fork unless absolutely necessary. But first-class etiquette is not built on basics. It is built on subtleties sharp enough to cut. You begin to notice them during breakfast, when a gentleman at the next table lifts his cup with 2 fingers instead of 3. The woman across from him mirrors the gesture instantly, like a reflex. You test it yourself, lifting your cup with deliberate grace, and someone 2 seats down gives you a tiny approving nod. You are unsure whether to feel flattered or alarmed that strangers seem invested in the angle of your fingertips. Here, even the simplest motion can escalate into social commentary. You sip carefully, trying not to overthrow any kingdoms in the process. The rules reveal themselves slowly. You learn that conversation must never begin with anything too earnest. Weather is safe. Travel is safer. Finance is acceptable only if everyone at the table has the kind of wealth that does not need bragging. Illness is forbidden unless it belongs to someone's distant relative, and even then it must be discussed with applause-level optimism. You discover that compliments should sound sincere, but not overeager, as though you admire the person's dress, but would still survive emotionally if it vanished. And if someone compliments you, deflect lightly, as if your outfit chose you, rather than the other way around. Walking through corridors becomes a lesson in silent negotiation. If a couple approaches from the opposite direction, you step slightly to the right but not too far, because yielding too dramatically suggests insecurity, and insecurity is considered more dangerous than rough seas. If someone greets you, you respond with a polite warmth calibrated to exactly the correct temperature. Too cold and you become aloof. Too warm and you risk becoming memorable for the wrong reasons. It is a delicate dance, the kind where everyone pretends they are not dancing. You watch seasoned passengers navigate it effortlessly. They glide into conversations with charm that looks effortless only because they have rehearsed for decades. They ask questions that sound casual but are actually reconnaissance missions for determining lineage, income, and whether the person they are speaking to is the sort who would embarrass them at a garden party. You try to keep up, offering polite answers while silently checking whether you have committed any unforgivable social crimes. Standing too close, laughing too loudly, pausing too long before responding to a comment about someone's prized spaniel. Then one afternoon, you accidentally break a rule. You ask a gentleman where he is from without first offering a piece of mild personal information about yourself. His eyebrows lift a fraction of an inch. A small social alarm bell rings somewhere in the room. You feel it. But before the moment becomes disastrous, you summon the first-class method of recovery, the elegant pivot. You smile and add a light remark about the weather in the harbor earlier that morning, something breezy and unthreatening. And just like that, the tension dissolves. He answers your question as though nothing unusual happened. You sense relief settling into the air like dust. The ship has forgiven you. You start to understand how etiquette here is less about rules and more about choreography. Everyone is performing a role, not because they are insincere, but because the performance keeps the peace. Rich people have perfected the art of avoiding discomfort, and etiquette is their shield. But you also learn something else, something no one tells you outright. Once you understand the steps, you can bend them. Polite rule breaking is practically its own sport. Ask a bold question but cushion it with humor. Laugh a little louder during a quiet moment, but follow it with a gentle remark that restores the balance. These small rebellions, if done skillfully, make you interesting rather than scandalous. By the end of the day, you navigate the ship with newfound awareness. You walk with the calm confidence of someone who knows which fork to use, which topic to avoid, and how to break a rule without causing whispers. You sense the unspoken expectations pressing around you, shaping conversations and gestures, yet you move through them with quiet ease. The etiquette is still a maze, but now you know where the soft walls are, the places you can press without causing cracks. You head back toward your cabin, and for the first time, you feel like you are not simply observing first-class life. You are participating in it, slipping through its rules with enough grace to earn your place, and enough nerve to enjoy bending them just slightly when no one is looking. You meet the stewards slowly, not because they hide, but because they move through the ship with such effortless precision that you barely notice them until they stop at your elbow. One appears beside you in the corridor, offering assistance with a smile so warm it could soften steel. Another materializes near your table in the lounge, refilling your glass before you realize your drink has dropped below half. Their politeness feels endless, a resource mined from some invisible reserve, and yet you catch the flicker of something tired behind their eyes. It is the exhaustion of people who sleep too little, walk too much, and serve passengers who sometimes forget they exist as anything more than perfectly starched uniforms. You begin to observe them the way they observe you. They notice everything. They know which passengers prefer strong tea and which ones require 3 polite reminders that formal dinners start at a specific time. They know who tips generously and who treats tipping as an insult. They know which husbands hide their boredom behind cigars, which wives hide their irritation behind compliments, and which families have arrived with drama tucked neatly between their trunks. Stewards float through these stories with quiet expertise, collecting fragments of information without ever seeming to listen. One morning, your cabin steward arrives with fresh towels and the calm demeanor of a man who has already survived 8 crises before breakfast. He smooths the bedspread with elegant precision and asks whether you slept well, though he already knows the answer from the slight curve of the pillow. His smile does not falter, but you sense the truth beneath it. His day is long, his break is short, and he has memorized every quirk of every passenger on his deck. When he leaves, you realize he has somehow straightened the room, replenished the washing stand, and replaced the flowers in the vase without you seeing him do a single thing. Later, in the corridor, you overhear 2 stewards exchanging a few hushed words near a service door. Their voices are low, but their tone carries the familiar rhythm of gossip. Not cruel gossip, but the kind that keeps people sane. One mentions a gentleman who requested that his shoes be polished twice in the same hour. Another laughs softly and adds something about a passenger whose hat boxes require their own logistical strategy. The moment they sense footsteps approaching, their faces reset into perfect professionalism. By the time you pass them, they are once again stewards carved entirely out of courtesy. Curiosity prompts you to watch them more closely. In the dining saloon, their movements are almost balletic. Platters glide from kitchen to table. Courses appear and disappear with the smooth timing of a play directed by someone who refuses to tolerate improvisation. They anticipate requests before passengers voice them. A missing fork is replaced instantly. A shawl is retrieved before anyone remembers they left it behind. They notice if someone is cold, warm, flustered, lonely, or trying to impress their table mates. They move as though reading the room not with their eyes, but with an instinct sharpened by years of navigating the moods of wealthy travelers. One evening, as you walk toward the cafe, you find a steward leaning briefly against the wall, taking the smallest possible break. His shoulders sag for one stolen moment, and he exhales the kind of breath that belongs to someone who has been awake far too many hours. When he sees you, he straightens instantly, offering a polite nod. You return it, and something unspoken passes between you, an acknowledgement that behind every immaculate hallway and every polished railing stands a small army of people who keep the illusion alive. During dinner, your favorite steward, a quiet man with quick hands and a tired smile, tells you in a low voice that the ship feels like a world within a world. Then he adds, with a glance toward a nearby table, that certain passengers carry their troubles aboard as stubbornly as they carry their luggage. His tone is light, but his eyes shimmer with stories he will never share fully. You sense that he knows more secrets aboard this ship than any gossip column ever will. As the evening winds down, you watch them prepare for the end of another long shift. Their smiles remain, unfaltering, but now you see their edges more clearly. The exhaustion is still there, tucked behind the professionalism, layered beneath courtesy. Yet so is something else, a quiet pride in maintaining order within a floating palace that demands perfection from dawn until long after midnight. You return to your cabin with a new appreciation for the hands that keep Titanic running. The passengers may be the ones living the dream, but the stewards are the ones who make the dream believable. And tonight, as the ship hums softly beneath your feet, you realize just how much of this glittering world rests on the shoulders of those whose names few will ever bother to learn. You step into the reading and writing room and immediately feel as though you should apologize for the sound of your own breathing. The space glows with soft light filtered through tall windows, each drape arranged with such precision it could have been measured by a mathematician. The room smells faintly of polished wood, fresh ink, and the kind of floral perfume that costs enough to make flowers question their own worth. Chairs upholstered in gentle pastels sit in neat formations, inviting guests to sink into them with quiet elegance. No one actually sinks, of course. Sinking implies relaxation, and relaxation here requires discipline. A handful of passengers occupy the room, each performing their own version of refined concentration. A woman sits near the far window, pen in hand, poised above delicate stationery. Her expression carries the determination of someone composing a letter designed to make the recipient feel both flattered and slightly guilty. Across from her, a gentleman in a crisp suit reads a newspaper, as though it personally offended him earlier and he is giving it one final chance to redeem itself. His brow is smooth, his posture perfect, his page turning silent enough to qualify as a magic trick. You take a seat at one of the writing desks and notice how the chair barely makes a sound. Even the furniture has agreed to behave. The desk holds a fresh stack of Titanic embossed paper, a fountain pen, and an ink pot arranged with military precision. You pick up the pen and feel the weight of it, heavy enough to suggest importance but light enough to remind you that your handwriting will be judged if anyone glances over. You begin to write, aware of every tiny scratch of the nib on the paper, each one echoing through the room like a thunderclap disguised as calligraphy. The quiet here is not an accident. It is curated, deliberate, priceless. You sense that the silence has been polished as carefully as the silverware in the dining saloon. No one whispers. No one coughs. Even the turning of pages sounds like a polite suggestion rather than an action. You begin to suspect that if someone sneezed, the entire ship might list slightly under the weight of collective disapproval. The room demands a certain kind of behavior, a gentleness, a restraint that feels both comforting and slightly oppressive. A steward glides in, carrying a small tray with tea and biscuits. Moving so softly you wonder if his shoes are made of velvet. He sets the tray on a side table without a sound, not even the faint clink of porcelain. His expression is serene, but his eyes flick briefly from guest to guest, assessing needs before they manifest. He disappears just as quietly, leaving behind a trail of calm competence. The silence absorbs him as though he were never there. Near you, an older woman folds her hands over her lap and stares out the window. She looks as though she is contemplating the ocean, though she might simply be thinking about how lovely it is to observe waves without having them splash anywhere near her. Another passenger, younger and slightly restless, taps her finger gently on the desk, then stops when she realizes the sound is too bold for this environment. She replaces the tapping with a slower, more socially acceptable pattern of stillness. You try to return to your writing, but now you are hyper-aware of every movement. The room's calm has a strange effect. It inspires you to focus, yet it also pressures you to appear focused in a manner that suggests you have never been distracted in your life. You shift in your seat with measured precision, trying not to create friction loud enough to ruin anyone's meditative posture. You take a sip of tea, and even that feels dramatic. The clink of the cup on the saucer echoes more loudly in your mind than it does in the room. After a while, you begin to understand the appeal. The silence carries authority. It shelters you from the constant hum of conversation elsewhere on the ship. It gives you space to think, or to pretend to think, which is sometimes just as valuable. The reading and writing room is more than a place to read or write. It is a sanctuary for the cultivated image of refinement, a quiet stage where passengers present their best version of themselves, whether composing letters, studying newspapers, or simply pondering the view like a philosopher with impeccable taste. You set your pen down and admire the page you have filled. Your handwriting looks neater than usual, as though the room has corrected your habits through sheer intimidation. You stand carefully, pushing your chair back without a sound, and the other passengers do not look up, but you sense that they approve of your quiet exit. Stepping back into the corridor feels like resurfacing from underwater. The noise of the ship returns, soft but lively. You glance back once more at the open doorway, the room glowing like a calm world sealed behind glass. Silence may be free elsewhere, but here it comes with thick carpets, hushed movements, and a sense of dignity that money buys without effort. You walk on, carrying a piece of that stillness with you. You step onto the first-class promenade and feel at once both exposed and elevated, as though the ship has quietly informed you that your posture now matters. The air is brisk but polite, carrying just enough chill to make the sea feel alive without being rude about it. The wooden deck beneath your shoes is smooth and freshly scrubbed, the planks arranged in patient lines that seem to guide you forward with gentle insistence. Sunlight breaks across the railings in scattered flashes that look almost intentional, as if the designers positioned the Atlantic specifically for aesthetic effect. A handful of passengers are already walking the length of the promenade in slow, deliberate strides. No one rushes. Rushing implies urgency, and urgency is unbecoming of someone who paid to be here. Men stroll with their hands clasped behind their backs, shoulders squared, chins lifted to a careful angle that says both, "I am wealthy," and also pretending to be unaware you are looking at me. Women wander in pairs, their gowns swaying in soft currents, their hats angled like architectural features designed for admiration. This is not exercise. This is theater. You start walking, matching their pace, and find that the rhythm of your steps adjusts almost automatically. Something about the space encourages you to glide more than walk, perhaps because the ship itself seems to glide beneath you. The promenade stretches long and uninterrupted, a luxurious runway bordered by deep wicker chairs and sheltered spaces where passengers lounge with the casual dignity of people who expect cushions to remain loyal. Some sit with blankets tucked neatly over their legs, sipping broth or tea as though the ocean needs to see that they are perfectly content. Others read newspapers while occasionally glancing up to see who else is passing and how their outfits compare. It does not take long for you to notice the choreography. Everyone is here for the fresh air, yes, but also to be quietly observed. A promenade on Titanic is not simply a walkway. It is a social mirror. Each step reflects your poise, your wardrobe, the subtle competence with which you occupy space. You catch sight of a man leaning on the railing, gazing at the horizon with the serene concentration of someone auditioning for a painting. His coat is immaculate. His shoes gleam despite the sea's best effort to dull them. He glances at you for a moment, assessing, then nods, a tiny gesture that feels like an evaluation stamped and approved. On the far side of the space, a pair of older women discuss something urgent in hushed tones. Their expressions suggest tragedy, but their voices carry the melodic lilt of gossip rather than sorrow. You catch phrases about someone's cousin's scandal, someone else's unfortunate marriage, and how fresh ocean air cures nearly everything except poor breeding. Each statement is punctuated by a unified sigh. You suspect they have been sighing together for decades. The sea stretches beyond the glass panels in rolling waves that shift from deep blue to silver as clouds drift lazily overhead. Gulls arc through the sky with the grace of creatures unburdened by propriety. You inhale deeply, surprised by how clean the air feels, sharp and salty, rich with the promise of open water. Even the ocean seems to understand that first-class passengers prefer their scenery dramatic but tidy. As you continue your slow march, you sense eyes on you now and then. Not in a menacing way, more like mild curiosity wrapped in good manners. Every guest here is performing, and the audience is everyone else. You adjust your stride, straighten your shoulders, lift your chin to that particular angle others seem to favor. You begin to understand the unspoken rule. The promenade is where you display the smoothness of your life, the ease with which you exist. Back home, you might have worried about looking too polished. Here, polished is the base requirement. A steward emerges briefly from a doorway, carrying folded deck blankets. His timing is impeccable. He notices a lady shiver at the far end of the promenade and moves toward her with the precise speed of someone trained to anticipate need before it becomes a request. The lady accepts the blanket with a small smile, and you see the steward bow his head slightly before slipping away, absorbed once more into the machinery of perfect service. You pause at the railing, resting your gloved hands on the cool surface. The ocean stretches in every direction, endless and calm. The ship cuts through it with the confidence of something enormous and sure of its place. For a moment, you feel suspended between sky and water, caught between the raw wildness of nature and the polished world behind you. The promenade hums softly with footsteps and conversation, but the sea offers quiet, a vastness that makes even the most elegant passengers seem small in the kindest possible way. When you finally resume walking, you do so with a new understanding. This is not just a deck, it is a stage where the curtain never falls, where everyone plays their part without acknowledging the performance. You move with more intention now, more grace, aware that on Titanic, even a stroll can reveal who you are, or at least who you want others to believe you are. You follow the signs toward the Turkish baths with the mild curiosity of someone who has never associated relaxation with intentional sweating. The corridor grows warmer as you go, a gentle heat that wraps around your neck and sinks into your bones, as if the ship itself is quietly whispering that elegance sometimes requires discomfort. You pass a steward who nods with a knowing smile, the kind reserved for passengers about to experience a luxury they did not realize existed. It is the smile of a man who has seen many wealthy people step into the baths and emerge looking slightly bewildered, but far more relaxed. When you enter the waiting area, the warmth becomes richer, almost velvety, carrying hints of eucalyptus, soap, and something faintly sweet you cannot place. The lighting softens everything it touches, and for a moment, the world feels blurred at the edges. A steward approaches with a towel draped neatly over one arm, guiding you with the steady politeness of someone accustomed to escorting people who pretend they know where they are going. You accept the towel with a nod, and he gestures toward the changing rooms with a small flourish that makes it feel like a ritual rather than an instruction. Inside, the air grows heavier. The floor tiles gleam with a quiet confidence, polished to mirror the warm lantern light. When you step toward the first chamber, a wave of heat presses against you, not aggressively but firmly, the way a warm blanket does when you settle beneath it. The room is lined with marble benches that shimmer through the rising steam. You sit cautiously, half expecting the stone to be uncomfortably hot, only to find that it cradles you with just enough warmth to loosen every muscle in your shoulders. Other first-class passengers occupy the space with a practiced serenity that suggests they have spent their lives lounging in expensive humidity. A gentleman with a perfectly trimmed mustache exhales as though he has just solved the mysteries of the universe. Another man, older and rounder, sits with his towel draped in a manner that says he has surrendered entirely to the heat and has no plans to reclaim his dignity until he leaves. A woman in a neighboring chamber speaks softly to her companion about the restorative powers of steam, her voice floating through the mist with the calm authority of someone quoting a doctor she may or may not have actually consulted. The steam thickens, curling around your ears, softening your thoughts. You start to understand why people pay extra for this. It is not just warmth. It is the illusion that the rest of the world has temporarily lost permission to bother you. The air feels heavy enough to pin your worries to the floor. Even the sound of the ship fades, until all you hear is the steady drip of condensed steam falling onto the tiles and the deep, slow breaths of passengers pretending they are not secretly delighted by how indulgent this all feels. As you move into the hotter chamber, your skin tingles, your pulse shifts, and your mind grows pleasantly foggy. The ceiling glows with lantern light filtered through layers of steam, giving everything a halo that makes you feel as though you have wandered into a dream designed by someone with impeccable taste. One man, braver than the rest, lies flat on the marble slab in the center, arms spread slightly apart like he is auditioning to become a decorative fountain. A steward enters to offer guidance with water, temperature adjustments, or soothing words should anyone begin to wilt. You marvel at his ability to remain composed while everyone else slowly melts. When you finally step out of the heat, wrapped in a towel and moving at the speed of a contented cat, the cool air of the hallway feels miraculous. Your senses sharpen, but in a softened way, as if the world has been politely turned down to a pleasant volume. The steward meets your gaze and gives the faintest nod, the look of someone who knows the baths have performed their quiet magic once more. You walk away with your pores open, your muscles loose, and your spirit floating somewhere between luxury and mild disbelief. You have just experienced the refined art of sweating in style, and for a moment, you feel like royalty made of warm fog and good decisions. You push open the door to the smoking room and step into a world where the air feels thick enough to hold secrets. The lighting is low and amber-toned, as if the room prefers to exist somewhere between late evening and mild mischief. The scent hits you immediately, a mix of tobacco, leather, polished wood, and the faint undertone of men trying very hard to appear unconcerned about their bank accounts. A steward glances up from behind the bar, his expression the neutral calm of someone who knows half the empire's gossip but will only share it in the afterlife. You move deeper inside, feeling the warmth from the fireplace melting into the smoke swirling lazily overhead. You catch glimpses of expensive shoes near brass spittoons, glinting cufflinks, and tailored coats draped over chair backs with the casual arrogance of clothing that cost more than most people's monthly wages. This is not a room for relaxation so much as a stage where relaxation pretends to be civilized. Several men sit around a central table, each with a glass of something amber in hand. The cards move with swift precision, the kind that suggests years of practice and perhaps years of denial. You hear coins clinking lightly, a sound that feels both thrilling and vaguely dangerous, as though each coin is making its own tiny announcement. One man laughs, loud and full, but the sound does not reach his eyes. Another leans back in his chair, puffing a cigar with the slow self-satisfaction of someone who enjoys being observed. His smoke coils through the air in soft ribbons, weaving itself into the already crowded haze. You take a seat near the window, partly to observe and partly to keep a safe distance from whatever financial calamity might erupt at the card table. The glass is cool against your arm as you look out at the darkening sea. Evening drapes itself over the waves in shades of deep blue, and the faint glow of Titanic's lights reflects across the water, giving the impression that even the ocean is trying to look sophisticated. The hum of conversation behind you blends with the clatter of ice in glasses and the muted pop of cigar embers. It creates a rhythm you did not expect to find relaxing. Nearby, a pair of older gentlemen debate something with great enthusiasm, their voices rising and falling like waves hitting shore. You catch phrases about coal supplies, politics, and which whiskey is most fitting for a man of taste. Every so often, one of them pauses to sip slowly, as though the drink itself has entered the argument and requires proper consideration. Another man, younger and more handsome in the way future biographies will describe with unnecessary flourish, sits alone at a small table, reading a newspaper with the practiced seriousness of someone hoping the room notices his intelligence. A steward approaches you politely and asks if you would like a drink. You nod, trying to look as though you belong here, as though you, too, have opinions about coal and whiskey pairings. He returns with a glass that glows warm in your hand, and as you take your first sip, you realize the drink contains just enough burn to remind you that luxury and discomfort often arrive in the same glass. The card table grows louder. Someone wins a hand, and the tension briefly softens. Someone loses a hand, and the tension rebuilds instantly, like steam returning to a kettle the moment the lid drops back into place. You watch as men attempt to mask disappointment with gracious smiles, but the tightness around their eyes tells the truth. Here, fortunes shift like the sea, and reputations rise and fall as swiftly as cards are dealt. One misjudged bet, and your name becomes tomorrow's favorite whispered cautionary tale. Yet beneath the games and bravado, there is something strangely tender about the room. The camaraderie of men pretending not to care too much, the quiet clink of glasses shared among acquaintances who only become affectionate after midnight, the soft murmur of laughter that carries a hint of loneliness under its polished surface. You feel it settling around you like a warm coat, comforting in its familiarity despite belonging to strangers. When you finally stand to leave, the room hums on without noticing. The smoke swirls around you, trailing your steps as though reluctant to let you go. You step back into the cooler corridor, carrying with you the lingering scent of tobacco and the faint realization that the smoking room is not just a place for cigars and cards. It is a place where pride, identity, and fortune balance on the thin edge of a playing card, wobbling with every shuffle. You dress for dinner with the solemnity of someone preparing for a diplomatic summit rather than a meal. The corridor outside your cabin hums with the rustle of gowns and the muffled clack of polished shoes. First-class passengers drift toward the dining saloon like migrating birds, each trailing perfume, confidence, and just enough vanity to power the ship if the coal ever runs out. The air carries a polite tension, the expectation that tonight will be an event rather than a meal, the kind of experience that requires posture, stamina, and possibly spiritual preparation. A steward greets you at the entrance with a nod that feels almost ceremonial. The moment you step inside, the room swallows you with its golden glow. Every surface gleams. Every chandelier sparkles with the enthusiasm of someone trying to impress the sun. Long tables stretch across the space, covered in white linen so crisp it practically glows. Crystal stemware waits in neat rows, reflecting candlelight in a delicate shimmer that makes you afraid to breathe too strongly. You take your seat and immediately sense the gravity of the occasion. The chairs are heavy in a reassuring way, as though anchoring you for the duration of what will undoubtedly be a marathon of etiquette. The guests nearby settle into their own seats with the practiced grace of people who have attended more formal dinners than family gatherings. Conversation begins at a gentle murmur, a warm hum rising above the soft clink of silverware being adjusted minutely to achieve perfection. The first course arrives so discreetly you hardly notice the stewards moving. Plates descend with precision, each one arranged like an edible painting. A soup so delicate it looks offended by the idea that it might someday be consumed. You lift your spoon and taste something luxurious enough to make you briefly reconsider every meal you have ever eaten. Around you, heads nod in quiet agreement, appreciation expressed through raised eyebrows and subtle sighs rather than speech. Conversation deepens its roots as the next courses arrive one after another. Each dish is more elaborate than the last, and the stewards appear in a perfect procession as if choreographed by an invisible conductor. A gentleman at your table begins discussing art with the serene certainty of someone who has never met an opinion he disliked. His companion counters with a story from Paris that may or may not be true, but is definitely dramatic. Across the table, two women compare details of their gowns in tones disguised as compliments. Each sentence sharpened just enough to draw a little blood if examined too closely. Time stretches in the soft candlelight. You lose track of how many courses you have eaten because counting them feels vulgar, and also because the stewards whisk away the evidence with alarming speed. You discover that dinner in first class is not about food alone. It is a ritual performance. The dishes are the acts, the conversations, the transitions, and you are expected to participate with the same commitment as everyone else. Even the pauses between courses demand proper expression, a raised chin, a thoughtful comment, a delicate laugh at something that was not actually funny. Somewhere between the fish course and the roast, you realize the meal has achieved a strange effect. You are full, yes, but also strangely energized, buoyed by the room's collective determination to remain elegant, no matter how far into the evening the event drifts. A steward refills your glass with silent certainty, and you begin to understand why some people claim dinner on Titanic is a form of endurance training. Dessert arrives in a flourish, an architectural masterpiece made of pastry and ambition. The table collectively admires it before daring to eat it. The flavors are rich, almost decadent, and yet no one finishes more than a polite portion. It is not the done thing to appear greedy. The moment the plates are cleared, conversation softens to a gentle glow, everyone settling into the comfort of survival. You have made it through, without slouching, without spilling, without offending anyone's distant cousin's sensibilities. When you finally stand to leave, the room feels suspended in a dreamlike haze, warm with candlelight and accomplishment. The meal has lasted longer than some relationships you have known, and yet it ends with a strange sense of satisfaction, as though you have completed something both ancient and necessary. You step into the corridor, pleasantly dazed, aware that you have just participated in a tradition designed less for hunger and more for the sweet illusion that life, for a moment, can be perfect. You notice it before you understand it, a quiet ripple in the atmosphere that does not disturb anything visibly but shifts something beneath the surface. It begins at breakfast, when a woman wearing pearls that look older than most countries greets a gentleman whose success is so recent it probably still smells faintly of fresh ink on bank ledgers. Her smile maintains perfect shape, but the corners tighten just enough to send a message. He returns the smile with enthusiasm, unaware or pretending to be unaware of the careful distance she keeps, as though new wealth carries static electricity. You begin seeing the patterns everywhere. Old money moves with the ease of people who have never been hurried in their lives, whose ancestors likely mastered the art of gliding centuries ago. Their clothes are understated, their colors soft, their fabrics rich in a way that whispers instead of shouts. New money glitters, brighter jewelry, newer suits. Hats with the confidence of birds determined to be tropical despite the climate. Their movements are lively, their conversations enthusiastic, filled with references to success that arrived quickly enough to feel unreal. In the lounge, you watch a young couple with the delighted energy of people who have only recently discovered what luxury feels like. They marvel at a vase on a pedestal, admiring it loudly enough that several nearby traditionalists flinch. One older gentleman looks up from his newspaper with the expression of someone confronted by an unexpected circus. His mustache twitches, the only sign of emotional upheaval he allows himself. The couple either does not notice or refuses to care, because they continue admiring everything in sight with the zeal of tourists in a cathedral. During tea service, the tension sharpens. An impeccably dressed woman from an established family mentions her ancestors' estate in a calm tone that carries generations of pride. A newly wealthy guest replies with a cheerful story about his latest business venture, speaking with the volume of someone used to being heard in crowded rooms. Their smiles never falter, but each statement lands like a soft tap of invisible fencing. You sense that both believe they are winning, though neither will ever admit to playing. Even the stewards feel it. Their expressions remain neutral, but their eyes flicker with subtle recognition as they navigate between the two worlds. They know which family has 3 generations of influence stitched into their collars, and which ones arrived with coins still warm from recent circulation. Yet they treat everyone with equal care, because that is their art, the ability to serve without participating in the quiet social battle unfolding around them. You notice that old money tends to cluster together, forming small constellations of quiet refinement. They speak in low voices, their conversations flowing like gentle streams, rarely punctuated by large gestures. New money forms louder orbits, bright and energetic, full of ambition and the thrill of finally arriving where they always believed they belonged. Their laughter rings louder, their compliments bolder, their presence warmer, as if they carry the glow of freshly minted opportunity. At dinner, the contrast becomes nearly theatrical. Old money diners use their cutlery with a smooth, unthinking rhythm, as if born with silver spoons, already placed politely at the correct angle. New money diners follow with admirable determination, occasionally hesitating over which fork performs which miracle, but masking uncertainty with confident smiles. When someone from an old family mentions their lineage, the new family counters with investments, innovation, or travel. Each statement, a stone placed gently on the scale, yet beneath the tension lies an odd interdependence. Old money draws strength from its history, but it also clings to relevance, watching new money with wary curiosity that borders on admiration. New money seeks entry into circles that once felt unreachable, looking at old money with a mix of aspiration and quiet rebellion. Each needs the other to define itself. Without contrast, neither category would shine quite as brightly. As the evening deepens, you realize this ship is large enough to hold both worlds, yet small enough that they cannot avoid one another. The tension never erupts into conflict. It simply lingers, shaping conversations, glances, and the delicate choreography of where people choose to sit or stroll. You feel it around you like a faint current, the soft hum of pride and ambition brushing against polished wood and crystal stemware. By the time you leave the lounge, you understand the strange truth. On Titanic, status is not static. It shifts with every gesture and every word, balancing between legacy and aspiration. And you walk the corridors feeling the weight of it, aware that you stand in a world divided not by walls but by centuries of expectation. You learn the hierarchy of cabins the way one learns that certain families prefer to whisper their accomplishments while others hire an orchestra. It happens gradually, through casual comments that carry too much meaning and glances that measure more than they reveal. At first, you assume everyone in first class lives in equal comfort. After all, the corridors shine the same, the carpets cushion the same, and the stewards bow with identical grace. But then you overhear 2 women discussing someone's accommodations as though they are rating a small kingdom's stability. One morning, as you pass through the lounge, you hear a gentleman remark that he is staying in a suite on B deck. He says this casually, as though stating the temperature of the tea, but the reaction it earns makes you realize he might as well have announced that he owns the ocean, Another man nearby nods with the solemn respect of someone acknowledging sovereignty. You listen as they discuss square footage, private sitting rooms, and bathrooms with the awe normally reserved for rare relics. It dawns on you that cabins here are not simply rooms. They are declarations. When you return to your own cabin, you suddenly see it in a new light. The polished wood, the soft bed linens, the flowers refreshed daily. It feels luxurious, yes, but now you understand that some passengers view their cabins not as retreats but as trophies. You imagine the grandest suites, the ones with adjoining rooms and private promenades where one can stroll without encountering the masses. Word spreads throughout the ship that certain cabins have windows framed by carved wood, so ornate it seems unnecessary, yet deeply appreciated by those who enjoy unnecessary things. You encounter a young couple in the corridor who speak breathlessly about their accommodations on a deck. Their eyes glow as they describe the sitting area, the wardrobe space, the detail carved into the furniture. They talk about their cabin the way some people describe childhood homes or beloved gardens. Minutes later, you overhear an older gentleman insist, with a faint sniff, that sea-deck cabins offer more privacy and thus superior refinement. He speaks as though the geography of the ship has granted him moral authority. During afternoon tea, you find yourself listening to a quiet argument between two women who cannot seem to agree on which deck offers the best blend of prestige and tranquility. One praises B deck's proximity to the finest rooms, while the other claims A deck attracts too many show-offs. They sip their tea with composed expressions, while hurling subtle insults masked as architectural opinions. A nearby steward maintains perfect neutrality, though you suspect he knows the truth better than anyone. Every deck has its loyal defenders, and their loyalty has very little to do with logic. You begin noticing other details. The way passengers casually reveal their deck level as though unveiling an heirloom. The way some speak proudly of their porthole views, while others boast about the art on their walls or the extra space between their wardrobe and the writing desk. A woman with a voice like polished silver remarks that certain cabins offer stronger vibrations from the engines, which she deems unacceptable. Another insists the gentle hum helps her sleep and cannot imagine being bothered by such things. Their disagreement is gentle yet fierce, a duel fought with porcelain cups and civil smiles. When invitations to small gatherings float through the corridors, you notice that cabin locations influence where people choose to host. Those in the grand suites open their doors with theatrical flair, welcoming guests into rooms so large they echo slightly. Those in more modest first-class accommodations keep gatherings intimate, relying on charm and conversation rather than square footage. No one says it aloud, but everyone senses which invitations carry more weight. One evening, as you return to your cabin after a long stroll on the promenade, you pass a group of passengers murmuring outside a suite. Their tone carries reverence, as though the owner of the room has achieved something remarkable simply by booking it. You slip inside your own room and sit for a moment, listening to the distant hum of the ship. Your cabin feels perfectly comfortable, warm and inviting, yet now also part of a wider constellation, each room shining with its own soft status. You realize that on Titanic, cabins function like miniature kingdoms. Some are grand, some modest, each with its own quiet politics. Passengers judge without admitting they are judging, compare without confessing they are comparing. And as you stretch out on your bed, surrounded by soft lamplight and the steady heartbeat of the ship, you find yourself knowing exactly where your small kingdom fits in the grand floating empire. You cross the threshold into the first-class suites and feel as though you have wandered into a world that stopped believing in limits long ago. The air is warmer, softer, scented faintly with lavender, and something else that whispers wealth in a language you do not speak, but immediately understand. The corridor carpeting thickens beneath your feet, absorbing your steps with the indulgence of a mattress. Even the light changes. It glows rather than shines, as though filtered through layers of comfort that have been carefully curated to prevent stress from entering this part of the ship. A steward opens a suite door for you, and the moment it swings inward, you feel your sense of reality wobble. The space is enormous, far larger than anything that has any right to float on water. A private sitting room stretches out before you, furnished with velvet armchairs, a writing desk carved with delicate patterns, and soft curtains billowing gently from the movement of the ship. For an instant you forget you are on the Atlantic. It feels more like stepping into the kind of townhouse that appears in magazines meant to inspire awe or mild despair. The bed, visible through an open doorway, is a monument to comfort. It rises high, draped in linens so crisp and clean, you suspect they have never been touched by anything less than perfection. A small table nearby holds fresh flowers arranged with the exactness of someone who has never once settled for an accidental bouquet. The wallpaper glows softly in the lamplight, every detail chosen to soothe nerves no one here is supposed to have. You wander deeper inside, half expecting the room to keep expanding. You notice how everything seems determined to make life effortless. A wardrobe large enough to store a household's entire winter clothing stands beside a dressing table stacked with gilded brushes. A marble-topped washstand gleams proudly, its fixtures polished to a shine so bright the metal seems almost self-aware. On the wall hangs artwork that would feel perfectly at home in a manor, each frame heavy enough to anchor a small boat. The suite appears ready to fulfill every need except the need to remember the outside world exists. A wealthy couple enters behind you, escorted by a steward who carries their luggage with the expression of a man accustomed to handling trunks that contain more jewelry than clothing. The couple surveys the room with practiced calm, their eyes drifting across the furnishings like seasoned judges evaluating a newcomer on the social circuit. Their satisfaction is subtle but unmistakable. They discuss where to place their belongings, where they will take tea, and how delightful it will be to entertain guests here. They speak of the suite not as a temporary space, but as a miniature realm over which they now preside. You stand near the window and pull back the curtain slightly. The ocean stretches endlessly, dark and serene, its waves rolling far below. The view is stunning, but the room steals your attention again before you can fully admire it. Its warmth wraps around you like a promise, hinting that the world is gentle, predictable, and tidy. But you know it is only a performance, a carefully constructed illusion designed to make first-class passengers believe that comfort is the natural order of things rather than the product of staggering effort. The steward explains in a soft voice that meals may be served privately here, should guests prefer solitude over the grand dining saloon. He gestures to a small door leading to an even smaller private hallway where service arrives unseen, as if the universe itself conspires to keep inconvenience at a polite distance. You imagine stewards gliding silently behind the scenes, operating like an invisible heartbeat keeping these suites alive. As you wander back into the sitting room, you consider how easily one might forget they are on a ship at all. The gentle movement of the sea becomes background music, and the hum of the engines fades under layers of velvet, wood, and luxury. You realize how seductive it is, this cocoon of comfort. It makes you believe that the world is stable, generous, and always willing to place fresh fruit on your table without being asked. The couple behind you settles onto the armchairs with the contentment of monarchs taking their thrones. You step toward the door, feeling the strange pull of the suite, its warmth tempting you to linger. For a moment you imagine staying here, wrapped in softness and light, forgetting storms and turmoil, forgetting even the ocean. But you leave before the room convinces you that life is nothing more than polished wood and perfect linens. As the door closes behind you, you understand the truth. In the first-class suites, comfort is not merely offered, it is curated, exaggerated, and elevated until it begins to look like something unreal, something dangerously close to a dream that refuses to end. You begin to sense it as the sun slips beneath the horizon, leaving a stretch of deep blue water that glitters under Titanic's electric glow. Evening settles into the ship with the practiced ease of a performer who has repeated the same entrance hundreds of times. The lamps soften, conversations lower, and a new rhythm emerges, subtle and slow, like the gentle turning of a music box. You step into the first-class corridors and feel the transition immediately, a hushed anticipation that wraps itself around the air. The lounge is your first stop. Its doors open just enough to spill warm light into the hall. Inside, the atmosphere has shifted. Earlier in the day, it buzzed with polite conversation, the rustle of newspapers, and the occasional cough disguised as sophistication. Now the room hums differently. Passengers lean closer to one another, their voices softer, their postures looser, as though the evening gives them permission to exhale. A pianist plays in the corner, his fingers drifting across the keys in melodies that curl through the room like smoke. People sip port or brandy, each glass cradled with reverence, as if the liquid inside contains secrets that only reveal themselves after dark. You move on and find the corridors alive with subtle motion. Couples stroll together at an unhurried pace, their whispers trailing behind them like silk ribbons. Their laughter is softer, warmer, shaped by the shared feeling that nighttime aboard Titanic carries its own charm. A few men return from the smoking room with flushed cheeks and loosened collars, their earlier seriousness melted by cigars and opinions. They walk with the glow of people who believe life is unfolding exactly as it should. Near the grand staircase, the evening crowd gathers in small clusters. Some admire the woodwork as though seeing it for the first time, their hands gliding along the polished banister with renewed appreciation. Others stand at the base of the great clock, engaged in conversations that drift between travel stories, flirtations, and small confessions shared only when the lights grow dim. The atmosphere vibrates with a soft electricity, unspoken and gentle, as if the ship itself leans in to listen. You wander toward the music saloon, drawn by distant strings. The door opens with a quiet creak, revealing a space bathed in warm amber light. Chairs are arranged in tidy rows, most now occupied by passengers who sit with serene attention. A small ensemble performs, the notes delicate and unhurried. Violins rise and fall like a sigh, the cello steady beneath them, carrying the room along in slow currents. People close their eyes, their faces softening in the glow, the music smoothing away whatever tensions the day has left behind. You take a seat near the back, feeling the rhythm seep into your bones. Later, as you return to the corridor, you notice how the ship seems to slow with the hour, not physically, but in spirit. Passengers retreat to their cabins in gentle waves, the conversations fading into whispers. Even the stewards move differently, their steps measured, their voices softer, aware of the fragile quiet settling across first class. They dim lights, straighten stray cushions, and prepare the ship for sleep while maintaining the illusion that perfection never rests. You make your final stop on the promenade. Night air sweeps across the deck in cool, steady breaths. The sky is a broad canvas of stars, bright and steady above the dark water. A few passengers stand along the railing, their silhouettes outlined against the moonlit sea. Some speak softly, others simply gaze out, their thoughts drifting with the waves. You join them, resting your hands on the cool railing, watching the water shimmer beneath Titanic's steady advance. The ocean feels enormous, but peaceful, as if it too participates in this nightly ritual. As the hours grow late, the promenade empties further until only a few figures linger. The ship hums around you, engines steady, lights glowing like constellations stitched into its iron bones. You feel a quiet connection to everyone aboard, a shared contentment that settles across first class like a soft blanket. Nightlife here is not wild or loud. It thrives in gentle tones, polished rooms, and the comfortable certainty that today has ended beautifully. You turn toward your cabin, the soft hum following you down the corridor. The ship breathes in low, steady rhythms, carrying you all through the night, wrapped in a sense of ease that feels almost unreal. You first notice it over breakfast, when a woman at the next table lowers her voice just enough to signal importance while raising her eyebrows just enough to guarantee attention. She leans toward her companion and whispers something that makes him choke lightly on his toast. Not dramatically, just the kind of cough that says a scandal has landed. You pretend not to listen, but the entire room shifts slightly, as though 60 people have tilted their chairs toward the same conversation without moving an inch. Within moments, whatever she said begins its journey, carried by nods, murmured remarks, and the subtle excitement of people who have finally been handed something interesting to talk about. As the day unfolds, you realize gossip aboard Titanic moves with remarkable efficiency, gliding through first class like a breeze that has memorized every corridor. You hear snippets in the lounge, quiet fragments passed between passengers who disguise their curiosity behind porcelain cups. Someone mentions a passenger who boarded in a dramatic state. Someone else mutters about a mysterious late-night knock on a cabin door, and another swears they saw a gentleman from A deck arguing with a steward near the staircase. None of these details connect, but somehow the stories merge in the air, forming a narrative that shifts with each retelling. You step into the reading room and find several passengers absorbed not in their books, but in discussions disguised as critiques of literature. A woman turning pages a bit too slowly whispers that she heard someone lost a valuable necklace. Her companion insists it was not lost, only misplaced, and adds that the necklace belonged to a woman who pretends her fortune is older than it really is. You watch as the story grows in the space of 5 heartbeats, transforming from a simple misplacement to a possible act of intrigue. By the time you leave the room, the necklace has acquired a shadowy thief and a motive no one can quite explain. Later, during a stroll along the promenade, you overhear 2 men speaking with the solemnity of diplomats. They discuss a rumor that a certain famous passenger requested a midnight meal of unusual extravagance. One claims he knows this because he saw the steward carrying dishes that looked suspiciously decadent. The other adds details about the passenger's temperament, embellishing with each breath until the tale borders on legend. Their voices remain composed, but you can sense the thrill beneath their words. Gossip here is not mischief. It is currency, traded carefully between those who relish the subtle social power it provides. You begin to notice the stewards too. Though they rarely speak openly, they carry an awareness in their eyes, a flicker of recognition when someone mentions a name or a rumor. They do not confirm anything, of course. Their professionalism is as rigid as the ship's steel beams. But there is always a slight shift in their expression, a subtle acknowledgement that they know more than anyone else on board. If gossip is the wind swirling through first class, the stewards are the mountains shaping its path. In the afternoon, you settle into the lounge again, watching the stories weave themselves into fresh shapes. A conversation begins at one end of the room about a passenger who may or may not be traveling under an assumed name. By the time it reaches the opposite end, the passenger has gained a secret past, an estranged lover, and a suspiciously large trunk. The more absurd the details become, the straighter people sit, as though the seriousness of their posture might compensate for the wildness of the tale. What fascinates you most is how quickly the stories loop back to you, transformed beyond recognition. Something you overheard in passing at breakfast returns to your ears by dinner, puffed up with new characters and moral implications. It feels like watching children play telephone, except dressed in diamonds and accompanied by string music. And every person aboard contributes. Not with the loud enthusiasm of gossip mongers, but with the refined, barely suppressed delight of people who insist they rise above rumor while actively participating in its circulation. As evening settles into the ship, you realize gossip travels faster than Titanic ever could. It loops the decks before the engines complete a single steady rhythm. It seeps into conversations over tea, into quiet pauses during walks, into the soft exchanges between couples leaning toward one another in dim light. It binds strangers together with shared curiosity, uniting the bored, the proud, and the quietly observant under one glittering canopy of implication. By the time you return to your cabin, the latest tale has already evolved twice, reshaped by whispers passing through the corridor. You close your door and sit on the edge of your bed, marveling at the strange ecosystem you have entered. On Titanic, gossip is not just entertainment, it is momentum, a force as constant as the engines humming below. You begin to see it only after you have grown accustomed to the pleasures themselves. At first, the luxury washes over you so easily that you hardly question it. Your cabin is tidied as though by magic. Your meals appear with the grace of theater performances, and every room glows as if polished by sunlight. But then you notice the small traces, the faint echoes of work that linger around the edges of perfection. A steward's hurried footsteps fade just before you enter a corridor. A cart stocked with gleaming silver disappears behind a service door the moment you round a corner. Slowly, the invisible scaffolding of Titanic's opulence reveals itself. It happens most clearly one morning when you rise early, long before most first-class passengers would dream of stepping into the hallway. The corridor is unusually quiet, not yet softened by polite greetings or delicately perfumed gowns. That is when you see a steward crouched beside the baseboard, polishing a section of wood with brisk efficiency. He looks up, startled, as though caught in a moment he prefers to keep unseen. With a polite smile, he stands, straightens his jacket, and continues down the hall before you can offer more than a good morning. The spot he cleaned gleams brighter than the rest, a small halo of labor left behind. Later, as you wander through the ship, you pass a partially open service door near the grand staircase. Inside, you catch sight of a narrow hallway lit by stark lamps, a stark contrast to the warm glow of first-class spaces. Stewards move with swift purpose, exchanging quick instructions, sorting linens, and arranging trays of glassware with disciplined speed. The air is thicker here, filled with the scent of soap, metal, and effort. Just as you take in the scene, a steward gently pulls the door closed, sealing off the world where the magic is made. During lunch, you notice how seamlessly dishes appear and vanish. A team of stewards coordinates the meal like clockwork, each movement synchronized so perfectly that it feels rehearsed. Plates glide onto the table with barely a whisper. Silverware is adjusted without you realizing it. Water glasses refill as though responding to telepathy. Behind every gesture lies a network of hands working tirelessly, smoothing every moment into elegance. You begin to appreciate how much of this world is designed to remain invisible. In the lounge, a steward discreetly straightens cushions and rearranges abandoned newspapers with the restraint of someone who has mastered the art of not intruding. When a passenger spills a bit of tea, another steward appears almost instantly, carrying a cloth as though he sensed the mishap from across the ship. He handles the situation with such quiet grace that no one even glances his way. The lounge continues humming with conversation, untouched by the labor unfolding at its margins. As the day unfolds, you find yourself seeing more. A lift attendant whose polite smile never falters, even as he works through hours that blend together. A hallway steward delivering hot water to cabins with a tray balanced perfectly atop his fingertips. A chambermaid changing linens with steady hands, smoothing every wrinkle until the bed looks like a snowdrift, untouched by footsteps. Their work never pauses, never slows, woven seamlessly into the ship's rhythm. You catch another glimpse of it near the Turkish baths, where two attendants carry baskets of freshly laundered towels. Their arms strain under the weight, yet their steps remain controlled. They vanish behind a corner before most passengers even realize towels had to come from somewhere. Up on deck, stewards adjust deck chairs, brush away stray cinders, and fold blankets neatly in preparation for passengers who will soon settle in with novels or quiet contemplation. Once you start noticing, it becomes impossible not to. Every shining surface carries the echo of hands that polished it. Every delicate meal represents hours of preparation in kitchens you will never see. Every comfort you enjoy is buoyed by people who work through fatigue, pressure, and endless demands. Their labor is the pulse beneath the ship's glamour, steady and uncelebrated. As evening approaches, you watch a steward escort an older passenger down the corridor with patient care, speaking softly, offering an arm as though it is the most natural gesture in the world. You realize then that the most invisible labor is not just physical, it is emotional, woven into smiles, reassurances, and the gentle art of maintaining calm. You return to your cabin with a new awareness of the world humming behind the walls. The room is warm, tidy, and welcoming, but now you see the human hands behind every detail. Titanic may shine with opulence, but its brilliance is carried on the backs of people whose names many passengers will never learn. Their work is everywhere, quietly holding the elegance together. You feel it creeping in on the third or fourth day at sea, a strange restlessness that hovers beneath all the elegance, like a draft no one admits to feeling. At first, everything dazzled you. The grand staircase gleamed, the dining saloon sparkled, the promenade stretched wide and inviting. But now, as the hours pass with the slow determination of a clock trying not to offend anyone, you notice something new settling over first class. It is boredom, quiet and refined, dressed in silk and hiding behind polite conversation. You first sense it in the lounge, where passengers pretend to read newspapers with the intense focus of people attempting to look occupied rather than actually being occupied. A man flips a page every few minutes, though his eyes remain fixed on the same article. A woman stares at her book without turning a single page, her mind clearly somewhere far more interesting than her novel. You sit nearby and watch the room breathe in slow, dignified waves. Even the pianist plays with a languid ease, as though the music itself is growing sleepy from repetition. Then comes the entitlement, weaving itself into the quiet with remarkable subtlety. A gentleman complains that the broth is slightly too warm, his tone carrying the weight of a diplomatic crisis. Another insists his chair by the window catches too much sunlight, and a steward must rotate it precisely 3 inches to restore universal balance. A woman sighs at the lack of interesting gossip, lamenting that no one has done anything scandalous in nearly 24 hours. She says this with a gravitas usually reserved for maritime emergencies. You begin noticing how the simplest inconveniences swell into grand sentiments. Someone declares the sea too calm. Another claims it is too active. A man mutters that the ship's engines hum inconsistently, though no one else notices a difference. A woman frets that her hat box seems slightly less accessible on this voyage than on others. Everyone agrees that this is troubling, though no one clarifies why. It becomes evident that boredom sharpens complaint into a kind of sport. Out on the promenade, the atmosphere shifts from leisurely to restless. Couples stroll with the rhythm of people pacing rather than enjoying the view. They stop often, not because the scenery demands admiration, but because they have run out of topics to discuss. A thin tension hangs in the air, as if everyone is collectively wondering when anything will happen to break the monotony. The sea rolls quietly below, providing no assistance. In the reading room, you watch a passenger tap her pen against the desk, hesitating over a letter she has no desire to write. Another man rearranges his stationery twice, searching for purpose in the alignment of envelopes. The silence feels heavier than usual, as though the very walls sigh under the weight of so many understimulated minds. The stewards move carefully, perhaps aware that the slightest disturbance might trigger an avalanche of polite but enthusiastic dissatisfaction. Later, over dinner, you witness the true performance of boredom and entitlement intertwined. A group of passengers debates the menu with the seriousness of philosophers confronting the meaning of life. Someone suggests the fish last night was superior. Another disagrees, claiming that tonight's vegetables lack ambition. A man at the end of the table declares he has never experienced such a predictable dessert course, a declaration that startles even the silverware. Yet beneath their critiques lies an undeniable truth. They are not truly unhappy. They are simply bored enough to manufacture drama where none exists. You feel it settling upon you as well, a gentle haze of aimless luxury. You wander the ship with no destination, drifting between rooms as though searching for something to break the spell. The grandeur remains impressive, but now it feels almost too perfect, too controlled, too unwilling to surprise you. You watch the horizon and sense the endlessness of the journey pressing in from all sides. The ocean is vast, magnificent, and absolutely uninterested in providing entertainment. You return to your cabin and sink onto the bed, listening to the ship hum beneath you. The room is warm, comfortable, flawlessly arranged, yet you find yourself longing for something that does not smell of polish or etiquette. A moment of spontaneity, a flicker of chaos, anything to remind you that life exists outside the careful choreography of first class. As you drift toward sleep, you understand the peculiar truth. Luxury can cradle you, soothe you, and impress you, but it can also smother you with its gentleness. And out here on the open sea, wrapped in comfort and expectation, even the wealthiest passengers cannot escape the quiet, persistent boredom that rises at the edges of privilege. Sunday arrives with a kind of ceremonial quiet, the kind that settles into the ship as if someone has gently lowered a velvet curtain over the usual hum of activity. You feel it the moment you wake. The corridors are calmer, footsteps softer, voices subdued. Even the air seems to move politely, as though aware that today is not a day for spectacle but for dignity. You dress carefully, sensing the unspoken expectation that first-class passengers should present themselves in a manner befitting both their social rank and their righteousness. When you step into the corridor, you notice fellow passengers emerging from their cabins in attire that suggests more than simple fashion. The men wear suits that convey moral authority. The women glide past in gowns chosen not for color or novelty but for propriety, a carefully calibrated blend of refinement and restraint. Hats suddenly seem taller, straighter, more responsible. Children, usually buzzing with mischief, move in composed silence beside their parents, eyes lowered just enough to indicate good upbringing. The atmosphere in the lounge feels different from other mornings. Newspapers lay unopened on tabletops, waiting politely instead of being unfurled with competitive anticipation. Passengers greet one another with subdued nods, exchanging pleasantries in tones softened by the weight of propriety. The pianist plays something slower, gentler, a melody that drifts through the air like a reminder to behave. You find a seat and watch the room gather itself into a tableau of polished serenity. Church service approaches, and the migration begins. Passengers walk toward the designated space with measured steps, their postures straight, their expressions arranged into mild piety. No one rushes. Rushing on a Sunday would be a kind of moral offense, the social equivalent of spilling tea on a bishop. You follow the procession and take your place among the rows of chairs. The room fills with the murmured sound of people adjusting their clothes and clearing their throats modestly. When the hymns begin, the voices rise in careful harmony. Some sing with genuine conviction, eyes bright as stained glass. Others sing as though fulfilling a contractual obligation between themselves and the universe. A few mouth the words without producing sound, maintaining the illusion of participation without engaging their vocal cords. You join in hesitantly, surprised by how easily the moment sweeps you into its rhythm. The voices blend, creating a warm current that drifts through the room and wraps around the gathering like a shawl. Throughout the service, you sense an intricate performance taking place beneath the surface. It is not insincerity exactly, but rather a kind of social choreography. People pray with an awareness of who sits nearby. They bow their heads with the quiet grace of those who know they are being observed. Respectability becomes a shared script, recited with varying degrees of enthusiasm, but executed flawlessly. When the service ends, passengers rise in synchrony, smoothing jackets and adjusting gloves before drifting out with expressions that suggest moral renewal. Afterward, the ship eases back into its Sunday rhythm. Meals are quieter, conversations gentler, laughter softer around the edges. You sit in the dining saloon and watch families discuss their children's studies, upcoming travels, or charitable endeavors. No one mentions card games, gossip, or last night's brandy. Those topics will revive tomorrow. But today, the world pretends to be spotless. On the promenade, passengers walk slowly, gazing out at the ocean with contemplative expressions. The sea glimmers in soft shades of silver, as if cooperating with the day's tone. You stroll among them, feeling the hush settle inside you. A steward passes with a tray, offering warm drinks to anyone who wants them. His smile is courteous but subdued, matching the atmosphere perfectly. Even the ship's engines seem to hum more quietly, as if lowering their voice in respect. Later in the afternoon, you stop in the reading room and find several passengers writing letters home. Their handwriting is neat, purposeful, full of the kinds of phrases people use on Sundays to convey civility and gratitude. You sit and begin your own letter, though you write more slowly than usual, as if the day itself demands gentleness. As evening approaches, the formality softens. The passengers begin to speak a little louder, laugh a little more easily. And by dinner time, the usual energy starts to seep back into the room like warmth returning to cooled embers. You sense a subtle shift, the release of the day's restrained performance. Jackets are unbuttoned. Conversations brighten. Dessert is enjoyed with fewer pauses between bites. When you finally return to your cabin, the ship feels quieter, but no longer constrained. Sunday has passed with all its rituals, its expectations, its polished manners. You settle into your bed with a strange sense of comfort, aware that today offered something rare aboard a floating palace of distraction. A shared pause, a breath, a chance for everyone to pretend, if only briefly, that virtue and elegance occupy the same deck. You step onto the promenade in the late afternoon and immediately feel the calm settle over you, a hush so complete it almost seems rehearsed. The sea stretches out in every direction, smooth as glass, the horizon a soft, blurred line where sky and water merge without argument. Titanic glides through it with effortless confidence, the bow cutting a silent path that leaves barely a ripple in its wake. The ship feels less like a vessel now and more like an enormous, floating promise that nothing bad could ever touch the people aboard. You walk along the railing and lean forward slightly, watching the water slip away beneath you. It moves in slow, lazy folds, as if reluctant to disturb the peace. There is no wind, no spray, no dramatic crash of waves, just the rhythmic pulse of the engines beneath your feet, steady and reassuring, like the heartbeat of a creature too large and too certain of itself to be threatened by the Atlantic. Above you, the sky is pale and soft, touched by shades of gold as the sun begins its slow descent. Passengers wander nearby with the relaxed air of people who have forgotten what discomfort feels like. Couples stroll arm in arm, pausing occasionally to admire the stillness of the sea, as though participating in a ritual the ocean has choreographed for them. Some stand in quiet clusters, discussing their plans for the next port or recounting stories of past voyages, their voices low and content. Even the children, usually restless and full of energy, seem subdued by the calm, their games gentler, their laughter softer. You take a slow breath, tasting the faint salt in the air. It is cool, refreshing, almost too mild to belong to the open ocean. You feel your shoulders loosen, your mind emptying of the small concerns that lingered earlier in the day. The ship feels invincible in this light, its decks gleaming, its railings warm beneath your hands. You sense the collective unspoken belief spreading through first class like a subtle perfume. This ship will not falter. This journey will not challenge you. This world of ease and elegance will float on forever. A gentleman near you taps his cane lightly on the deck, nodding toward the horizon as if he personally arranged the weather. He remarks that the sea has never looked friendlier. His companion agrees, adding that no vessel has ever sailed more steadily. Their confidence is not loud but woven into every word, as natural as breathing. You listen and realize the calm waters are not just a moment of good weather. They have become evidence, proof that Titanic is exactly what the world claims it to be, unshakable. As you walk farther down the deck, you pass a steward adjusting a deck chair with the unhurried grace of someone working in perfect conditions. He catches your eye and offers a soft smile, as if acknowledging that the sea itself has taken the day off. You sit for a while, sinking into the chair, feeling the subtle vibration of the engines beneath you. The motion is steady, soothing, almost hypnotic. Around you, passengers settle into their seats with books, blankets, or quiet thoughts, basking in a serenity that feels almost theatrical. The sun sinks lower, turning the water beneath the ship into a shimmering sheet of gold. For a moment, the entire horizon glows, casting a warm light across the decks and softening every detail into something dreamlike. You close your eyes and listen to the faint murmur of voices, the gentle hum of machinery, the occasional flutter of a page turning. It all blends into a single, comforting soundscape that suggests the world is exactly as it should be. When you rise and continue walking, the air feels cooler, but the calm still wraps around you like a soft cloak. Even the gulls seem to glide more smoothly, as if obeying the ship's serene momentum. You pause at the bow, watching the water part beneath you, smooth and untroubled. The ship moves so steadily that you could almost forget how vast the ocean truly is. You stand there, feeling the stillness seep into your bones, and for the first time you understand why everyone aboard seems so certain of their safety. Titanic does not simply sail. It reassures, it convinces, it creates an illusion so complete that, for a moment, you believe it too. Nothing this calm could ever break. You notice it first in the smallest gestures, the ones so subtle they almost slip past you. A pause before a greeting, a half step backward to maintain distance, a smile that never quite reaches the eyes. At first, you think you imagined it, a trick of the ship's soft lighting or the peculiar etiquette that floats through first class like invisible perfume. But as the days pass, the lines sharpen, thin threads woven through every corridor and conversation, shaping interactions before people even speak. It becomes obvious at breakfast, when a steward bends slightly lower while serving an older gentleman whose family name carries enough weight to anchor the ship. His voice softens, his hands steadier, his gestures more refined. At the next table, he works quickly, but not quite as delicately, as if the passengers there inspire respect but not reverence. You sense the difference immediately, even though no one acknowledges it aloud. The hierarchy breathes beneath every movement. Later in the lounge, you witness a small encounter that reveals everything. A well-connected woman, draped in subtle wealth, compliments another passenger's dress. Her tone is warm, her smile genuine enough, but the distance between them never closes. When the other woman responds, you hear the slight tremor in her voice, the careful choice of words, the way she lifts her chin just a fraction higher than usual. They stand close enough to speak comfortably, but far enough apart to maintain the rules neither of them dares violate. They part with polite nods, both performing an interaction that has already been judged by an invisible audience. On the promenade, the distinctions sharpen further. Some passengers stroll with the assured ease of people who have always belonged in places like this. Their hands rest lightly on the railing, their conversation drifting in calm, measured tones. Others walk with a more deliberate posture, conscious of every step, as though afraid of revealing they are new to this level of luxury. You catch glimpses of subtle evaluations, sideways glances exchanged between couples, silent verdicts rendered in the span of a heartbeat. You begin to understand how even silence carries social weight aboard Titanic. A greeting delayed by half a second becomes a signal. A quick nod instead of a smile conveys status. A question asked without appropriate preamble draws a faint tightening of the jaw. People navigate these interactions with the skill of seasoned diplomats, though the stakes are far less dramatic and far more personal. Reputation here is not just a matter of pride. It is a currency that determines how smoothly each day unfolds. During afternoon tea, you watch a group of passengers gather near a window. They speak softly, laughing at shared stories, their comfort with one another unmistakable. A newcomer approaches, offering a polite smile, and for a brief moment the group freezes. Not rudely, but instinctively, the way a flock of birds pauses when a stranger enters their space. They welcome him. But the warmth is slightly diluted, stretched thin enough to reveal its underlying caution. He joins the conversation with enthusiasm, but you sense the invisible barrier that will take time to dissolve, if it ever does. Even the stewards navigate the lines with practiced instinct. They know which passengers require elaborate courtesy and which expect efficient service without embellishment. They anticipate needs based on status, adjusting their tone, posture, even their route through a room depending on who occupies it. Their professionalism masks it, but you recognize the careful balance they maintain, honoring expectations shaped long before this voyage. One evening in the dining saloon, you observe the seating patterns that reveal more than any spoken rule. Families with old wealth cluster together, arranged by unspoken agreements that travel through generations. Newer fortunes sit nearby, close enough to share the glow of prestige, but not close enough to blend seamlessly into it. Interactions across the divide occur, but they are measured, cautious, wrapped in layers of diplomacy. By now, you move through the ship with heightened awareness, watching the lines ripple and shift. You notice how people hold doors for some passengers and not others, how conversations change tone depending on who joins them, how a compliment from one person can elevate someone standing, while a slight glance from another can send them back into uncertain territory. And yet, beneath all this, you sense something surprisingly human. The passengers, no matter how polished or proud, are trying to find their place in a world that floats above the ocean yet still clings to the rules of the land. Everyone performs, everyone watches, everyone protects their delicate social space. It is both exhausting and fascinating. As you return to your cabin, you realize how deeply class shapes life aboard Titanic, not through grand gestures or harsh words, but through the quiet choreography of everyday moments. The ship is a kingdom of courtesies and careful separations, and you are learning how to navigate it one gesture at a time. You notice it first in the way a man's hand trembles ever so slightly as he lifts his teacup. Not enough for anyone else to see, not enough to spoil the performance of effortless ease, but enough that you realize something has shifted. Confidence in first class is supposed to be as solid as the wood paneling and as glossy as the polished brass. Yet tonight it wavers in quiet, almost artful ways. The mask still shines, but the seams begin to show. Earlier in the day, you overheard a pair of passengers discussing the ship's speed with the kind of strained enthusiasm people use when they are trying to convince themselves of something. They spoke loudly about record crossings and engineering triumphs, but between their words lay a thin note of doubt. You catch it again when a woman glances up from her book to look toward the windows, as if the ocean might reveal a secret. Her fingers tighten on the page, flattening the corner with unnecessary precision. At dinner, the atmosphere carries an odd tension. Floating beneath the symphony of clinking cutlery and muted conversation, people still laugh. But their laughter arrives half a second too late, stretched thin like pastry dough pulled farther than intended. You hear a gentleman boast about investments with too much enthusiasm, his voice a little louder than usual, as though he fears silence might expose something delicate. His companion nods politely, but you see the doubt flicker across his eyes before the smile returns. The ship lists almost imperceptibly with the rhythm of the waves, but tonight even that simple movement seems to unsettle the room. A woman at a nearby table places a hand on her necklace, an unconscious gesture of grounding herself. She glances at her husband, who assures her with a gentle pat that everything is perfectly normal. The problem is that his pat is too quick, too firm, reassurance delivered with the urgency of someone who needs it himself. You sense the shift most clearly during a conversation in the lounge. A group of men sit surrounded by leather chairs and faint cigar haze, discussing business, politics, and the price of oil. But their voices hitch slightly whenever the ship hums, as if they are listening for something beneath it. One man jokes about icebergs with the confidence of someone who does not believe in them, but the laugh that follows is brittle, cracking like frost under a boot. Another counters with a story about unsinkable engineering, yet his eyes drift toward the window, scanning the sea's dark horizon. Later, on the promenade, the chill in the air feels sharper, though the temperature has not changed. Passengers pace with their coats pulled tighter, their steps brisker than usual, and their conversations lean toward speculation disguised as idle curiosity. You pass a pair whispering about the ship's route, another murmuring about the speed, a third debating the meaning of a distant vibration they felt earlier. It is not fear, not yet, but the prelude to it, subtle as a draft slipping under a door. In the reading and writing room, the stillness seems strained. A woman scratches out a letter with quick, tidy strokes, her lips pressed together. A gentleman pretends to read the newspaper, though he has not turned a page in several minutes. His gaze hovers just above the print, distant and troubled. You recognize the look, the quiet realization that no amount of luxury can buffer uncertainty forever. Even the thick carpets and gilded details feel slightly diminished, no longer as comforting as they were yesterday. You realize that the cracks are not caused by any visible danger, but rather by the growing awareness that the ship, for all its grandeur, is still a creation of human hands that can tremble, human plans that can falter, human pride that can overlook the simple truths of nature. The passengers sense it instinctively, even if they cannot name it. Confidence, when stretched thin, becomes translucent, and tonight you see through it. As you return to your cabin, the corridor seems quieter than usual. A steward passes you with a polite nod, but his footsteps are hurried, his posture a little too stiff. The lamps cast a warm glow, but even that feels slightly shy, as though the light itself is holding its breath. Behind each door you pass, you imagine the same subtle tension settling among the passengers, invisible but undeniable. You close your door gently, listening for the distant hum of the engines, and notice how it feels different now. Not louder or softer, just more present. You lie awake for a moment, sensing the faintest tremor of uncertainty slipping through the polished armor of first-class confidence. The cracks have formed, and once you see them, you cannot unsee them. You hear them before you see them, a gentle string of notes drifting through the corridor like a ribbon caught on a breeze. It pulls you toward the lounge with the soft insistence of something familiar and comforting, yet somehow elevated. When you step inside, the orchestra has already begun, arranged in a neat semicircle beneath the warm glow of the lamps. Their instruments gleam like polished treasures, and their posture carries the quiet dignity of men who know their work matters, even if most people never pause long enough to truly listen. You find a seat near the edge of the room, sinking into an armchair as the music unfurls around you. It begins with a light waltz, the kind that seems to lift the air itself, making everything feel a little brighter, a little more possible. Passengers who were moments ago wrapped in their own conversations now turn their heads, their expressions softening as the melody sweeps gently across the lounge. Even the stewards slow their pace, carrying trays with a rhythm that nearly syncs to the music. The musicians play with a craftsmanship that feels both precise and effortless. You watch the violinists, their bows moving in graceful arcs, each stroke smooth as silk. The cellist leans into his instrument with quiet devotion, coaxing warm, deep tones that settle into the room like embers. The pianist, calm and focused, drifts lightly across the keys, guiding the ensemble through shifts in tempo and emotion. You sense a deep unity among them, a shared understanding developed through countless rehearsals and unspoken cues. As the piece changes, the room transforms with it. The next melody blooms slower, richer, carrying something wistful beneath its polished surface. Passengers lean back in their seats, eyes distant, perhaps thinking of home or moments that slipped too quickly. You feel the music tug at your own thoughts, weaving through memories you had not planned to revisit today. That is the quiet magic of the orchestra. They play not just notes, but emotions, sometimes your own, sometimes borrowed from someone else nearby. A group of men near the fireplace lower their voices, suddenly reluctant to drown out the melody. A woman at a writing desk pauses mid-sentence, her pen hovering above the paper as though the music is gently guiding her thoughts. A young couple stands near the door, unsure whether to enter, not wanting to disturb the moment. You realize how seamlessly the orchestra shapes the evening, not through force, but through presence. Their music gives the room permission to feel. You stay longer than you intended, drawn deeper into the performance. Between pieces, the musicians exchange brief glances, confirming the next selection with a subtle nod or a raised eyebrow. Their faces are composed, but you can see the faint hints of fatigue tucked around their eyes, softened by a steady professionalism. They play for hours, sometimes in crowded rooms, sometimes for only a handful of passengers, yet their dedication never wavers. The meaning of their work becomes clearer the longer you watch. They are not here merely to entertain. They are the ship's heartbeat, stitching moments together with melody. Their presence smooths over awkward silences, fills long evenings, and offers passengers a way to escape the monotony that occasionally seeps into even the most luxurious surroundings. Their music makes the ship feel alive, transforming cold steel and polished wood into something warm and human. As the final piece of the evening begins, the room grows still. The melody rises gently, swelling with a quiet strength that settles over everyone present. You feel it in your chest, a soft stirring that reminds you how fragile and beautiful a moment can be. When the last note fades, it hangs in the air longer than it should, as if uncertain whether to let go. The passengers clap politely, the applause dignified but genuine. The musicians bow with modest smiles, accepting the appreciation without seeking it. You rise from your seat and step back into the corridor, the music still humming faintly in your mind. The ship feels different now, not because anything has changed physically, but because the orchestra has drawn your attention to something deeper. They reveal the soul of Titanic hidden beneath its grandeur, a reminder that beauty is not just in the architecture or luxury, but in the people who create moments that linger long after the notes fade. As you walk away, the echo of the strings follows you like a quiet companion, soft and reassuring, threading meaning into the evening. You feel it the moment you step into the corridor, a faint tension wrapped in the elegant hush of first class, too gentle to alarm, but too present to ignore. The lamps glow with their usual warm light. The carpets cushion your steps. The polished brass shines, as it always has, yet something in the air feels heavier. It hangs over the ship like a thin veil, shifting with every passing conversation. People speak in the same polite tones, but their eyes dart more quickly. Their smiles stretch a little tighter, and their laughter drifts away too soon, as if it does not want to linger. As you walk toward the lounge, you notice small anomalies that would have gone unseen any other evening. A woman pauses in the hallway, adjusting her glove 3 separate times before continuing, as though her fingers refuse to settle. A steward carrying a tray moves with brisk precision, but his posture is rigid, his steps clipped short. He offers a smile as he passes, but it flickers rather than warms. Even the air feels cooler, as if the Atlantic has pressed itself closer to the ship. In the lounge, passengers gather in familiar clusters, yet the lively chatter of earlier nights has softened. People converse with polite enthusiasm, but you sense an undercurrent of restlessness beneath every exchange. A man makes a clever remark, one that would usually spark a ripple of laughter, but tonight the response is muted, a blur of half smiles and nods. A woman sipping tea glances at the clock twice within a minute, her fingers stirring her cup long after the sugar has dissolved. Nearby, a gentleman folds and unfolds his newspaper until the creases look exhausted. You take a seat, watching the room navigate this strange shift. The orchestra plays, the music just as graceful as ever, but even their notes feel more restrained. The violinists draw their bows with practiced ease, yet the usual playfulness in their melodies seems tempered, as though they are holding back something you cannot name. The pianist's movements remain fluid, but his expression is distant, his attention drifting somewhere beyond the keys. The music fills the room, but it does not lift it the way it did the night before. When you venture onto the promenade, the air bites a little more sharply, the chill mingling with a silence that feels too deliberate. Passengers stand by the railing in small groups, gazing out at the dark water with thoughtful expressions. No one speaks loudly. No one tells stories about past voyages or future plans. The sea stretches endlessly beneath the stars, calm and unbroken, yet it feels different tonight, more watchful than serene. You inhale deeply, sensing something beneath the surface, something quiet but undeniable. You continue walking, passing a couple murmuring to each other in hushed tones. Their conversation ends abruptly when they notice you, replaced by the polite smiles expected of first-class passengers. Another man strolls alone, hands clasped behind his back, his brow drawn in a subtle, contemplative line. He nods politely as you pass, but his mind is clearly somewhere else. Even the sound of the engines feels changed. though you cannot explain how. Perhaps it is simply your awareness sharpening, tuning in to things you previously ignored. Back inside, the dining saloon glows with its usual elegance, but the atmosphere is strangely subdued. The conversations are gentler, the clinking of cutlery less frequent, the pauses between remarks longer. You watch as a server discreetly refills glasses, his movements precise yet strained. People attempt to carry on with the familiar rituals, but each gesture carries the weight of something unspoken. It feels like a play whose actors forgot their lines and are improvising with brittle confidence. Later, in the grand staircase, the shift becomes even more palpable. Passengers descend with their usual poise, but their steps are slower, more cautious. They linger at the bottom, exchanging small talk while glancing at the doors, the windows, the clock. The famous clock above the landing ticks steadily, indifferent to the unease gathering beneath it. You stand at the railing for a moment, listening to the murmurs drift upward, each voice woven with a thin thread of uncertainty. As the evening winds down, you return to the promenade one last time. The ocean remains calm, the sky bright with distant stars, and yet the stillness feels different now, less like peace and more like anticipation holding its breath. You grip the railing, feeling the cold metal press into your palms, and sense the entire ship poised between confidence and something more fragile. When you finally head back to your cabin, the corridor is quiet, the lamps casting long shadows that sway gently with the movement of the ship. You walk slowly, aware of the heaviness in the air, the subtle shift that wraps itself around the final evening like a whisper. Something is changing, not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. You feel it first as a shiver beneath your feet, so slight you almost dismiss it as the ship shifting against a wave. A faint tremor, a small complaint from deep within the steel. But then the sensation sharpens, stretching into a long, low scrape that travels through the floorboards, up the walls, and into your ribs. It is not loud, it is not violent, it is simply wrong. A sound that does not belong in a world built on perfect confidence. You look up from your seat in the lounge, expecting others to react, but for a moment, no one moves. A few passengers pause mid-sentence, brows lifting as they wait for the ship to settle back into its familiar rhythm. The orchestra hesitates, bowstrings brushing awkwardly against strings, then falls silent. The musicians exchange glances, their instruments held loosely, as if unsure whether to continue or stand. The room itself seems to hold its breath. Then the second sensation arrives. It is softer than the first, a muted jolt, almost polite, as though the ship is trying to avoid startling anyone. Glasses tremble on tables, a chair shifts a few inches, and a subtle groan rushes through the metal bones of Titanic. You grip the armrest without meaning to, your fingers curling around the polished wood as the silence thickens. Passengers begin murmuring, voices rising in waves of confusion. Someone asks what happened. Another insists it was nothing, just ice sliding along the hull, spoken with the confidence of a person who has never actually heard ice sliding along the hull of anything. A man laughs too loudly, as if volume alone can keep fear at bay. A woman stands abruptly, her chair scraping the floor, and presses a hand to her necklace. No one knows where to look. You rise and make your way toward the grand staircase with a crowd that moves without direction or agreement. Some walk briskly, eager for answers. Others stroll at their usual leisurely pace, refusing to allow a little noise to interrupt their dignity. A few remain seated, lips pressed thin as they pretend to find the situation amusing. But every face carries the same flicker of uncertainty, a small wrinkle of unease around the eyes. In the corridor, the atmosphere shifts from curiosity to tension. Stewards appear quickly, their footsteps precise, their expressions carefully arranged into calm. They assure passengers that everything is fine, that there is no reason for concern, that the ship is perfectly safe. Their voices are steady but overly controlled, stretched tight like strings about to snap. You watch one steward adjust his jacket twice before speaking, a small tell that betrays his worry. The ship seems to sigh around you, a long exhale from somewhere far below. The lights flicker just once, a tiny flutter that sends a ripple through the crowd. Someone gasps. Someone else whispers that it must be the engines adjusting. A gentleman insists the ship is unsinkable, the word landing heavily in the air, brittle enough to crack. You turn toward the nearest window, pressing close to see the ocean. The water outside looks impossibly calm, the surface gleaming under the moonlight, unbothered by whatever happened beneath it. For a moment, the contrast feels surreal. How can something so serene hold anything dangerous beneath its surface? A new sound emerges, distant but distinct. A bell ringing somewhere above deck, sharp and urgent. The corridor stiffens. People stop moving, their attention snapping toward the direction of the noise. Another bell answers. Then the faint thud of running footsteps, this time not from stewards, but from the crew. You feel your pulse quicken. The confusion settles deeper now, weaving itself into your breathing. You hear the engines slow, their steady hum dropping into a lower, uncertain rhythm. A woman beside you grips her husband's sleeve, her voice barely above a whisper. What was that? Is something wrong? Her question hangs unanswered in the air. The stewards try again, offering calm explanations and gentle smiles, urging passengers to return to their rooms while the officers assess the situation. But their voices cannot disguise the worry leaking into the edges of their tone. Their eyes betray what their words refuse to say. You take a step backward, feeling the ship's heartbeat falter beneath you, just enough to notice. The confusion spreads slowly at first, then builds, layer by layer, as every passenger realizes that no one seems to know what truly happened. Even the air feels different now, as though the ship itself is waiting. Then, without warning, a cold realization flickers across the collective mind of first class. Something has gone wrong. Not loudly, not spectacularly, but undeniably. And the confusion that fills the corridors begins to thicken into something heavier, something that tastes faintly of fear. You sense it spreading long before anyone names it. A slow tightening in the air that begins with whispered questions and stiff smiles. First-class passengers gather in the corridors and near the grand staircase, their faces arranged in expressions of mild curiosity that wobble at the edges. No one wants to be the first to admit they are frightened. Fear, after all, is unbecoming in rooms lined with polished oak and velvet drapery. So they cling to denial like it is another piece of fine luggage, something to be handled neatly and displayed only under controlled circumstances. A gentleman with a monocle declares loudly that ships scrape ice all the time, though his voice cracks halfway through the sentence. His wife nods vigorously, her gloved hands trembling slightly as she fidgets with the clasp of her purse. Another man insists that the engines simply adjusted their speed, as if that explains the bells ringing overhead or the faint tilt in the floorboards. He avoids eye contact with everyone, focusing intensely on the pattern of the carpet as though it might back up his theory. Stewards pass through with practiced calm, repeating the same reassurances in quiet, steady tones. Everything is fine. The captain is taking precautions. There is no cause for alarm. They smile politely, but their eyes dart too quickly, their footsteps too brisk. The passengers cling to their words anyway, extracting comfort from them like children grasping the last bit of warmth from a fading fire. One steward accidentally drops a stack of blankets while turning a corner, and the sound echoes sharply through the corridor. 3 people flinch. One mutters that the ship is simply settling. In the lounge, where the orchestra has resumed playing to encourage calm, the mood teeters between anxious and absurd. The musicians play with artificial cheer, their melodies bouncy enough to sound almost defiant. A few passengers applaud too loudly, as if applauding hard enough might keep fear from taking a seat beside them. You watch as a woman sits rigidly on a chaise, her spine straight, her gaze fixed on the far wall. She lifts her teacup to her lips and misses slightly, the rim clinking against her teeth. She does not acknowledge the mistake. A young couple approaches a steward with questions, their voices kept low so as not to attract attention. Are the lifeboats being prepared? Should they return to their cabin? The steward answers with a calmness so smooth it seems rehearsed. assuring them that nothing of the sort is necessary. But as he turns away, his shoulders sag for a single moment. The couple exchange a look, fear flickering across their features before they smooth it away. Out on the promenade, the cold air carries sharper truths than the warm rooms inside. People step out expecting reassurance from the sky and instead find a horizon that looks mercilessly vast. The stars glitter above the calm water, bright and indifferent. A man stands at the railing, gripping it too tightly, trying to steady the tremor in his breathing. He tells another passenger that everything is perfectly under control. His knuckles are white. You walk past a group of friends clustered together, their conversation looping in circles. One insists the ship cannot sink. Not a ship of this size, not with this engineering. Another agrees, but her voice is hollow, almost fragile. A third suggests they return indoors, where it is warm, but no one moves. They cling to one another with the desperation of people trying to anchor themselves in a reality that is slipping out from under them. Inside, denial blossoms into theatrics. A woman laughs loudly, too loudly, and announces she refuses to be frightened by something she cannot see. A man near her orders a drink, as though that act alone confirms his unwavering composure. You notice, however, that he keeps glancing toward the nearest exit. Then there are those who fall silent, the ones who feel the truth settling in their bones before their minds catch up. They do not speak, do not argue, do not summon reassurances. They simply watch the room with eyes that grow heavier by the second. They stand a little straighter, breathe a little slower, as if bracing themselves for something they cannot yet name. You remain among them, sensing fear and denial twist around each other in a strange, desperate dance. First-class passengers cling to elegance as a shield, performing calm even as the floor tilts beneath their feet. They are used to controlling their worlds with money, with social standing, with certainty. But tonight, none of those things matter. Tonight, fear has found its way onto the ship, and it refuses to stay politely out of sight. You step back into the corridor, and the shift hits you immediately. Whatever remained of first-class decorum dissolves in the air like steam from a teacup knocked to the floor. Voices rise, footsteps pound against carpet that was never meant for urgency, and the ship's once perfect symmetry of movement has splintered into frantic, overlapping paths. The illusion of privilege, so carefully polished and maintained, crumbles the moment survival becomes the only currency aboard. Stewards hurry past with life jackets in their arms, their faces pale and focused. They call out instructions with crisp voices that fail to mask the tremor beneath them. Passengers cluster around them, asking questions that come out half-formed. Are we in danger? Should we go outside? What does the captain say? The stewards repeat the same reassurances. But now their words sound thinner, stretched tight over a truth they can no longer disguise. You feel the panic underneath every syllable. You move toward the grand staircase, swept along by the current of bodies flowing in the same direction. People who once glided down these steps like royalty now clutch the railings, their polished shoes slipping on the smooth wood. A woman in jewels and silk grips her child's shoulders, her voice breaking as she tries to keep calm. A man waves a steward over repeatedly, demanding answers in a tone that grows more frantic each time. His authority, once unquestioned, now bounces uselessly off the bustle of the corridor. The orchestra's music, once warm and elegant, now feels tragically out of place. They continue playing, fingers trembling slightly, the melodies steady but haunted by the chaos unfolding around them. Passengers pass by with life jackets half-tied, some pausing for a moment as though the music itself might reverse what is happening. But the notes only underline the surreal truth. This is no performance. This is the unraveling of a world that believed itself untouchable. As you push through the gathering crowd, the temperature drops sharply. Cold air pours through an open doorway leading to the boat deck, carrying with it a frigid bite that stings your skin. The moment you step outside, you feel the wind slice through your clothes. The night sky stretches overhead, filled with stars that shine too brightly, indifferent to the scene below. The ocean lies silent and black, calm in a way that feels almost sinister now. Chaos takes on new shapes here. Officers shout instructions, their breath visible in the cold. Life jackets rustle, ropes groan against metal davits, and panicked footsteps scatter across the deck. People who once judged one another by the cut of a coat or the expense of a hat now stand shoulder to shoulder, united not by status but by fear. You feel the shift deep in your chest. Whatever order once ruled this ship has been swallowed whole. A man who boasted earlier about the unsinkable design now argues desperately with an officer, insisting his family be placed into a lifeboat immediately. His voice cracks with each plea. Nearby, a woman clutches the railing, staring at the tilted rows of deck chairs as if she cannot reconcile the sight with the luxurious world she stepped into days before. Someone drops a suitcase, its contents spilling across the boards: silk clothing, a silver hairbrush, a string of pearls that roll away unnoticed. No one stops to pick them up. You watch as passengers gather near the lifeboats, the early ones calm enough to listen, the later ones trembling so hard their life jackets shake. Crew members repeat the same instruction again and again. Women and children first. The words fall with an authority that was never needed until now. You see the confusion in the eyes of men who have always been accustomed to stepping forward, not stepping aside. You see the anguish in women who expected the world to protect them but did not imagine this would be the test. You step closer to the railing, feeling the ship's tilt deepen ever so slightly, a quiet shift that steals the breath from your lungs. Someone nearby gasps. Someone else begins to cry. The sea remains calm, maddeningly calm, as though mocking the fear spreading across the deck. The cold claws through your jacket, burrowing into your bones. In the distance, a lifeboat creaks as it lowers toward the water, its ropes straining under the weight of too many hopes and too few seats. A woman calls out to her husband as the boat descends, her voice raw, torn between heartbreak and urgency. He calls back, promising he will be fine, promising he will follow soon. His voice sounds steady, but his hands tremble violently at his sides. You realize then that the hierarchy that once defined every moment of this voyage has vanished. The fine clothing, the polished silverware, the ornate rooms, they mean nothing now. Out here, under the unforgiving starlight, wealth cannot buy safety, and status cannot command the sea. You feel the chaos tighten around you like a closing fist, and for the first time since boarding, you understand what it means to be truly small in a world far larger and far colder than you ever imagined. You stand on the boat deck, surrounded by a swirl of voices that rise and fall like wind gusts against the railings. In the confusion, something new begins to take shape, something raw and unfiltered. The polished world of first class has been stripped down to its bones, leaving only people, their choices, and the cold that gnaws at every exposed inch of skin. You watch them move, speak, break, and hold firm. And in the span of minutes you see more shades of humanity than you have in your entire life. A woman near you trembles violently as she tries to climb into a lifeboat, her hands slipping on the wooden edge. A steward takes her arm gently, guiding her with a patience that defies the urgency around him. His voice is soft, almost steady, and you can see how badly he wants to calm her. She looks at him with wide, frightened eyes, then nods once and steps inside. He offers a final reassuring smile before turning away and running to assist someone else. You know he is not required to do any of this, but he does it anyway. A few steps away, a man tries to force his way toward the lifeboat, pushing past a line of terrified women. His voice cracks as he insists he must be allowed to board, that his family needs him. Officers block him, their arms rigid, and he grows louder, desperation mixing with panic until he is nearly shouting. You see the moment he realizes that yelling will not change the rules, and his expression collapses. He steps back, not gracefully but brokenly, swallowing his fear with effort. His hands shake uncontrollably. But then you notice another man, one who stands quietly at the edge of the group. He helps a young mother guide her child into the boat, steadying her with a politeness that belongs to a different world. When she tries to thank him, he simply nods, offering her a small smile, then turns to help the next family. He moves with calm purpose, though you can see his jaw tighten every time the ship gives a small, unsettling shudder. He knows what is happening. He knows what it means. But he helps anyway. A woman in a fur coat steps forward, her chin lifted, her voice crisp as she instructs others where to stand. It is the same commanding tone she once used to request tea or adjust a dinner seating, but now it carries a strange resolve. She organizes people with brisk efficiency, pulling children close to their mothers, urging hesitant passengers toward the lifeboats. You realize she is not trying to maintain control of the situation to uphold dignity. She is simply doing what she can before the moment slips away. Closer to the railing, an elderly couple stands side by side, hands clasped, watching a lifeboat descend. They could push forward, they could plead for space, but they remain still, unmoving, sharing quiet words that disappear into the night. The woman rests her head lightly against the man's shoulder, and he presses her hand gently between both of his. They are steady in a way that sends a chill deeper than the wind ever could. Not far from them, a young man tries to joke with his friends, his voice too loud and too bright for the darkness around him. His laughter sounds brittle, like glass under strain, but he keeps going, determined to ease the fear gnawing at them. His friends cling to his humor, grateful for even a flicker of light, and you feel the weight of his effort. Bravery does not always look like stillness. Sometimes it looks like a trembling smile. A steward guides a child toward a lifeboat, then hesitates, scanning the deck for the mother. When he cannot find her, he kneels, looks the child in the eye, and promises he will not leave until she is safely in someone's arms. The child wraps tiny fingers around his sleeve, refusing to let go. He lifts her gently, cradling her as though she were something fragile and irreplaceable, and waits at the boat's edge until a woman reaches out to take her. Screams erupt farther down the deck as a group of passengers begin to panic, but others step in, pulling them back, steadying them, lowering voices that rise too sharply. You see fear contort faces, see it break through polished manners and unravel years of restraint. But you also see it resisted. You see it mastered. You see it met with an iron steadiness that comes from somewhere deep within. The ship shudders again. The tilt grows, the cold sharpens, and the truth settles over the crowd like falling snow. Bravery is not loud. Cowardice is not always shameful. People are complicated things, shaped in moments like these. And tonight, under a sky so clear it feels cruel, you witness all of it. You move with the crowd toward the lifeboats, swept along in a tide of voices that has risen beyond courtesy. The cold bites deep now, needling through your clothes, stealing warmth from your skin faster than your body can replace it. Breath fogs in frantic bursts as people press forward, no longer spacing themselves with practiced politeness. The deck that once echoed with soft laughter and leisurely footsteps now vibrates with urgency, a rhythm driven by the steady, horrifying tilt pulling the ship down. Officers shout instructions over the roar of panic, their commands sharp and strained. Women and children first. Step back. Keep order. Their words collide with the chaos, scattering like broken shards through the crowd. A woman ahead of you clutches her son so tightly his small face reddens, but he does not cry. He seems suspended in shock, his eyes wide and unfocused. A steward tries to lead them to the next boat, his hand trembling as he gestures, but people surge around him, desperate to reach the rail. Decorum collapses in real time. The same passengers who once held doors for one another now push, elbow, and wedge themselves forward with a fierce instinct born from terror. A man shouts that his wife is ahead without him. Another pleads for space for his sister, who cannot be seen anywhere. Someone insists they were promised a place, as though promises hold any power against the sea. Voices clash, rising into a single tangled cry that masks individual words. When you reach the boat station, the scene sharpens with brutal clarity. A lifeboat hangs half-filled, swaying slightly above the waterline. The officer in charge lifts his pistol not to threaten, but to regain control. The sharp crack of his voice slices through the panic. Women and children only. Stand back. A man tries to argue, voice hoarse, desperation pulling every syllable tight. He is pushed away by two stewards, their faces drawn and pale. The cold intensifies, settling into your bones with a heaviness that slows your breath. You watch as passengers cling to one another, forming clusters of trembling hands and tearful eyes. A mother grips her daughter's shoulders and bends down to look her directly in the face. She forces a smile, one that quivers with effort, then lifts the girl into the lifeboat. The child reaches for her, sobbing, but the boat is lowered before she can climb in after her. The mother drops to her knees, her hands covering her face as the ropes creak downward. Near the railing, a man in evening clothes attempts to keep order, spreading his arms as if he can physically contain the chaos. He urges everyone to remain calm, insisting the ship is not in immediate danger. Yet even as he speaks, the deck tilts another degree, and he stumbles. His expression fractures, revealing fear beneath the polished facade. He straightens quickly, pretending nothing happened, but the illusion has already shattered. You are pushed forward by the crowd, closer to the next boat. Your breath quickens as you see passengers climbing in, some shaking so violently the stewards must steady them. A few refuse to get inside at first, terrified of the drop to the sea. Others try to jump in too quickly, slipping on the icy rail. Officers intervene, dragging them back by their coats, shouting orders that blend with sobs and rising panic. Someone behind you curses the cold, curses the ship, curses the very idea of lifeboats that cannot hold everyone. Another person prays under their breath, the words stumbling over one another. A woman beside you mutters the names of her children, even though none are with her. She repeats them like a mantra, as if the sound might summon them from the darkness. You glance toward the promenade, seeing scattered groups still clinging to denial. Some stand frozen against the wall, unwilling to move. Others pace in frantic circles, waiting for someone to tell them what to do, someone who never comes. A few gather near the orchestra, who continue to play with grim determination. Their music feels impossibly gentle against the backdrop of desperation, a final fragile remnant of the world that existed hours ago. The next lifeboat is nearly ready. A steward taps your shoulder, guiding you forward, his voice low and urgent. He looks exhausted, but there is something steady in his gaze, something that tells you he has chosen to stay and help until the end. You nod, your throat tight, and step closer. As the boat dips toward the water, you hear the sound of the ship groaning, deep and mournful, as though it feels its fate dawning. The deck tilts further. People stumble. Someone screams. Decorum, once the ruling force of first class, dissolves completely. Only survival remains. You feel the cold long before you understand its full cruelty. It presses against your skin like a warning delivered in a language more ancient than fear. When you reach the boat deck again, the wind lashes at you with icy teeth, pulling at your clothes, stealing your breath with every sharp gust. The night is so clear it feels unnatural, the stars bright and countless, scattered across the sky with careless beauty. The sea below glistens like black glass, smooth and silent, a surface too calm for the chaos above it. Passengers huddle together along the railings, their breaths rising in clouds that vanish almost instantly. The tilt of the deck is steeper now, subtle but constant, enough that people brace themselves without thinking. The elegance that once defined first class has evaporated, stripped away by the cold and the urgency. Silk evening gowns cling stiffly against shivering bodies. Jewelry glitters uselessly in the moonlight. Fur coats, once symbols of indulgence, offer little protection against the bitter air. You watch as another lifeboat descends, ropes creaking, passengers clutching the sides with white knuckles. Someone calls out a name, voice breaking into the night. The only answer is the low groan deep within the ship, a sound that vibrates through the soles of your shoes. It feels like the ship is grieving, aware of the fate tightening around it. You grip the railing harder, feeling the cold metal burn against your palms. Nearby, a man collapses into himself on a bench, his coat pulled tight, his head bowed. Hours ago, he was laughing with friends over dessert. describing plans for New York with the enthusiasm of someone who assumed he had endless time. Now he shakes uncontrollably, whispering prayers you cannot hear, his face hollowed by disbelief. A steward approaches him, places a hand on his shoulder, and speaks softly. The man nods slowly, the gesture small and defeated. Farther down the deck, two women cling to each other as the officers prepare another boat. One has lost her gloves, her fingers purple in the cold, but she doesn't seem to notice. The other strokes her back, murmuring comfort even as her own voice trembles. They sway together with the movement of the ship, a fragile island of warmth in the freezing air. You catch only a few words, snippets of promises and pleas, but the meaning is unmistakable. They are trying to anchor themselves to one another before the darkness widens around them. A man paces along the rail, his hair blown wild by the wind. His expression flickers between disbelief and anger, as though he is still trying to negotiate with reality itself. At one point he shouts toward the officers, demanding clarity, demanding fairness, demanding something he cannot name. His voice fractures in the cold, scattering across the deck, and no one answers. Slowly, he stops, his shoulders slumping as the truth finally settles onto him. The myth of invincibility, the myth of superiority, the myth of safety, each has slipped from his grasp. You glance toward a group gathered near the orchestra. The musicians still play, their fingers stiff, their breaths visible between phrases. Their music carries a painful clarity now, drifting into the night like a final offering. People listen, not because they expect comfort, but because the sound reminds them they are still human, even in the coldest moment of their lives. You feel something tighten in your chest as the melody swells, fragile yet unwavering. Everywhere you look, the myths you took for granted unravel. Wealth does not insulate, elegance does not protect, confidence does not command the sea. The passengers around you, once proud and composed, now stare into the night with eyes filled by the same truth. Status has no place here. The ocean does not care who you are. The cold does not distinguish between jewels and rags. The ship, for all its beauty, is sinking beneath the weight of its own legend. You feel the deck shift again, a deeper pull this time, as if the ship is bowing to the sea. A collective gasp ripples across the passengers. Some reach for the railing, others grab the arms of those beside them. Fear rises in sharp breaths, thickening the air with panic. A woman stumbles, catching herself on a pillar. A man pulls his coat tighter, his teeth chattering violently. Above you, the stars remain impossibly bright, indifferent witnesses to the unraveling world below. You tighten your grip on the railing and feel the sting of metal searing your skin. The cold bites deeper, sinking through layers of fabric, through resolve, through denial. In this moment, you understand the full truth of the night. The myths of first class, the certainty, the comfort, the untouchable luxury have dissolved under the weight of the freezing sky, and all that remains is the raw, fragile human beneath. In the days after, the world feels muted, washed out, as if someone has lowered a heavy curtain between you and everything you once knew. You move through the hours with a strange, drifting awareness, as though you are not entirely awake. The cold remains in your bones, a lingering echo of the night that carved itself into you. You try to recall every detail, but the memories shimmer like reflections on water, shifting each time you reach for them. Survival is not a single moment. It is a series of small, disjointed fragments that refuse to fit neatly together. You remember the lifeboat, the way it rocked as it descended toward the sea, each creak of the ropes scraping against your nerves. You remember the cries from the deck, distant but piercing, carried across the freezing air like a chorus of ghosts. You remember the shock of the ocean when the lifeboat hit the water, the sharp jolt that rattled your teeth. Faces blur together now, pale and hollow, eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. You recognize some of them, others you never saw before that night. All of you bound by the same fragile, desperate hope. Out on the water, the ship looked impossibly vast even in its dying moments. You watched it tilt, watched the lights flicker and dim, watched the stern rise higher against the sky. For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. The world held its breath as Titanic groaned, a final, agonized note that vibrated through the sea itself. Then the ship slipped beneath the surface, swallowed by darkness. The moment was silent, then deafening, then silent again. The ocean closed over it as though it had never existed. You do not remember when you began to cry. Perhaps it was when the voices faded. Perhaps it was when the cold settled so deeply into your skin that you could no longer feel your hands. Perhaps it was when the enormity of what had happened finally tore through the numbness. You sat in that lifeboat, surrounded by strangers and survivors, listening to the oars dip in and out of water that glittered cruelly under the stars. When rescue finally came, it felt unreal. The bright lights cutting through the darkness, the heavy boards lowered toward your boat, the arms that reached for you and pulled you upward. Your limbs were sluggish, uncooperative, as though they belonged to someone else. You stepped onto the deck of the rescue ship and nearly collapsed under the sudden warmth. Blankets wrapped around your shoulders, hands guided you forward. Voices called instructions that barely made sense. Days passed in a haze of exhaustion. You ate without tasting. You slept without resting. The survivors around you drifted through the same fog, each holding a private world of memories too heavy to share. Conversations were sparse, fragmented, heavy with pauses. People tried to speak of what they had lost, but words stumbled under the weight of grief. Sometimes the ship's engines hummed in a way that made your pulse race, echoing the phantom vibrations of that night. You find yourself reflecting on the strange, dreamlike world that vanished beneath the waves. The grand staircase, glowing with warm light. The soft carpets muffling your steps. The music drifting through the air like a promise. The endless meals. The gentle conversations. The illusion of safety woven into every detail. It all seems impossible now, as if you imagined it. A stage set that vanished the moment the curtain fell. Yet some memories cling stubbornly. The laughter over tea, the clink of crystal glasses, the hush of the reading room, the orchestra's quiet devotion. You think of the people who walked those halls with you, the ones who held their composure with such confidence, unaware of how fragile their world truly was. You wonder where they are now, if they are anywhere at all. Sometimes you close your eyes and remember the calm sea before the impact. The shimmering path cut by the ship as it moved toward a future that would not arrive. You remember how safe it felt, how serene, how easily you believed in the myth of invincibility. Now you understand that even the most magnificent worlds can vanish in a single night, leaving behind nothing but memories and silence. Yet you also know that survival carries its own meaning. You breathe, you move, you remember. You carry forward the stories of those who cannot, their laughter, their fear, their hope, the quiet moments they never knew would be their last. You stand now on solid ground, looking out at a horizon that no longer promises certainty, but still offers possibility. The sea glitters under the sunlight, indifferent as always, and yet less frightening than before. Not because it has changed, but because you have. You lived through the collapse of a dream, and now, slowly, you step into whatever comes next.